everybody. So it's always wonderful for me to know when people can log in and tell me where they're from. It's very exciting to know there are people around the world that are listening to these great webinars. And I am trying to sort of get my, yeah, that's right. Okay. All right. That's a little better. Yeah, good. Okay, great. So shall we
you want to go
start?
ahead and share your screen?
Yeah, okay. You always have to walk me through this.
Okay, so click the green share screen button
Yeah, got it.
and go and do that. And while you're doing that, let me let everyone know we're also broadcasting live on Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook, each presentation is being broadcasted separately. So you can also check it out there. And welcome to all our Facebook friends. We have over 100 people streaming on Facebook right now, and we have 120 people in the chat room. Each presentation is being broadcasted separately, so you can also check it out. So Tricia, you go ahead and take it away.
Oh, okay. So I'm just sort of trying to get my bearings here, guys. So let's just see. In the chat box, if you guys want to just sort of type in where you're from, that would be really great. I would always love to see where everyone's from. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the slideshow. And so today we're really, first off, I really want to honor William Henry and the work that he did. I think it's so wonderful when you have researchers in this field who are working both in grounded historical information, but they're also able to work in the spiritual consciousness. And a lot of times that's not necessarily true. You have people who are maybe good historians, but they haven't kind of awakened that spiritual part, and you have other people that are very spiritually intuitive and attuned, but they're not necessarily very grounded in the historical part. So it's always really wonderful for me when I get to hear another speaker who has put the two sides of their brain together in such a very beautiful and masterful way. And I also want to thank Neil Gare for putting on these amazing presentations. You know, he continues to be a force for great good in the world as he collects the star seeds and the crystal children, the indigos, and the people like yourself, who many of you have come here to do missions, and you need this grounded information in order to get clear about what our past is, where we are in the present, and where we're headed in the future. So I think that this is a very important thing. We've got 3 hours together today, and let me just say that this presentation really was set up for a whole day long presentation originally. So we have a stopping point around 225 slides into it, and we may end the 3-hour presentation then, but we also have, if we want to, another 75 or 80 slides after that. So we're just going to sort of see how our pacing goes and whether or not it feels like we come to a completion point with our time. And if we do, then absolutely great. You're going to, believe me, have lots of information. If not, we'll wind up go ahead have more time, another 30 or 40 minutes at the end. Then we can always wind up doing those other 75 slides or so. But I'd also like to be able to leave some time, if we want to, for questions and answers. And it would be so great if I see all of you and we could chat that way. But at least we have the chat box. So that's something that I'll be able to look at from time to time. Okay, so welcome to Divine Encounters and Forbidden Knowledge. And we're really going to talk today about the hidden history of the gods and the hidden history really of planet Earth. Most of you may know, who have tuned in to hear me speak before, that I'm the author of 3 books, and I'm not going to spend much time talking about these simply because we have so much information to go through, but they're wonderful, fun books. They're profoundly researched. I think the Jesus book has 1,200 footnotes and 100 pages of back matter and over 100 illustrations, and the Sophia book's pretty much the same. But I always suggest people start with Dialogues with the Angels because it's a fun, easy to read book where you're talking about masters and angels and divas and the multidimensional nature of reality. So I always say, if you can, read the Dialogues with the Angels first, then go to the Sophia book, because both of these have the through line of a true story with lots of history and information. And then you can take on the Jesus book, which is kind of like a fudge sundae brownie, which is pretty darn intense. And It's a tour de force of the great spiritual mysteries, of course, profoundly honoring to Jesus and all the great masters and avatars and people who didn't even like Jesus. They read that book and go, I just love him. He's incredible, which I personally think he is. This is my new book that's coming out actually the end of this month. I'm so excited. It's with my publisher, Inner Traditions. You guys are among the very first to see the cover of it. Isn't it just really beautiful? The Angelic Origins of the Soul, Discovering Your Divine Purpose. And this is really about all of you. It's about the landscapes of heaven. It's about who we are as souls, how we actually do emerge out of these angelic kingdoms, how we take a journey down into, let us call this the lower worlds or the worlds of time and space, in order to experience the contrast of dark and light, to, literally be grit for the soul that begins to allow us to learn our lessons, to shape our character, and to have experiences throughout eternity. So, in many ways, I actually wanted to call this book The Landscapes of Heaven, because there's a whole section literally about the heavenly realms where we go, first-hand accounts of people who have died like myself and gone over to the other side and returned to tell us about what those lands of light are. And then there's 4 sections to this book. In the 3rd and 4th section, we actually get into what I've discovered through doing over 6,000 readings for people all around the world about our divine and celestial origins, and tracking the evolution of the soul through the 6 stages of soul evolution, from the beginner all the way to the master and bodhisattva stages, so that you can actually begin to discover where you are in that process. Also examining the 9 orders of the angels, from which each one of us actually emerge, and some of the qualities and the traits and the talents and the abilities that we would bring forward as a result of that, and how we come down here and how we get stuck in the worlds of illusion, how we forget who we are, and how we can wake up. So this really deals with the course curriculum of the soul and the journey that we're all on in order to really find and claim that deeper spiritual purpose for which we were really born. So anyway, it's a wonderful book, and they're giving me a color folio. Of course, I have about 100 black and white illustrations like my other books do, but I'm so excited about the color. They're really gorgeous images and very profoundly activating. So anyway, you guys can, I'll probably have copies of this in-house by maybe the last week of September. So you can go to my website and order it, but I'm really excited about this new book. So many of you may also know that I've had a mystery school that I've been teaching in Atlanta for about 12 years, and I have students now all over the world because I finally got the first 12 courses up online so that you could take them no matter where you live. So I have students literally in England, Denmark, San Francisco, Canada, New York, Ohio, Dubai, Japan. It's amazing. So if you can read English, you can take these. And again, these are on my website, so you can go check them out. Each one has a whole page dedicated to it with, excerpts and table of contents, and where you can really find out information about them. And I've got about 30 DVDs that really support this work, that kind of runs the gamut from angels and extraterrestrials to spirit guides, and some of the information about the mysteries, especially Thoth and Hermetics and the great spiritual mystery schools and the Philosopher's Stone. And so again, those are on my website. Very welcome to check them out. So now we're going to begin our exciting presentation on divine encounters and forbidden knowledge. And this is really the first time that I've given this one as an online class. So I'm really thrilled that you guys can take it. What a profound image this is, isn't it? We've got the symbol for the Anunnaki here. We've got a UFO coming in. We've got, it looks like the Hathor, or one of the large, gigantic extraterrestrial beings here with a human being. You can see the size difference. And we're going to be looking at that size difference in the evidence, the historical evidence, as we go along with this. But just astonishing. Here's one of the Anunnaki gods holding the Shen. The Shen was a symbol for kingship, which combined the masculine or the finite and the infinite or the feminine. together in sacred union together. And of course, this is the symbol of the planet of the crossing. And here's, of course, the symbol of the sun. So really great image. So certainly when we look back in time in all religious literature, there are accounts of human beings having encounters with some kind of extraordinary divine beings, beings that have unusual powers, whether they are technological powers or they are interdimensional or spiritual abilities or powers to materialize or dematerialize, to levitate, to fly, to telepathically communicate. And we're going to just take a look at a few of those that we know of from our Judeo-Christian history with these ancient encounters with beings, of course, that we call angels. One of the most famous, of course, is the story of Moses, which is for the Jewish religion really kind of a foundation story that, you know, Moses was this wise priest. They don't focus a lot on this, but in my Sophia book, I talk at great length about the real history of Moses. He was a priest in the temples of Heliopolis in ancient Egypt. Heliopolis was the temple of the sun. It was actually, that center was about 12 miles north of the three great pyramids on the Giza plateau, and it was really the omphalos, or the center point of of all the Egyptian temples. The walls were literally 45 feet thick, pretty thick walls, and it had temples to all the gods, but particularly the non-Ennead. And Moses actually was a priest, a very respected priest in this temple, and the temple was called On, O-N, in the Bible, or Anu, A-N-U, meaning pillar to heaven. Later, the Greeks renamed it Helio, for sun, Opolis for city, Heliopolis, the city of the sun, because it was dedicated to the solar energies of light and illumination. Now, of course, the story that we are given is that, hey, Moses, you know, was found by the Pharaoh's daughter in the rushes and raised with Ramses, and that at some point he discovered that he was actually half Hebrew, and so he looked around and found the Hebrews being oppressed, and so he, you know, demanded from his brother, hey, let the Hebrews go, and that didn't go so well, and he wound up killing accidentally a Egyptian overseer and fleeing for many years, and went down to southern Egypt, got married to a black woman and had children, and was having a shepherd's life. And then, you know, God, with a big G or a little g, depending on how you look at it, came and said, hey, I got a job for you, go back to Egypt and free my people. And then that brings us to the whole 7 deadly plagues, and how eventually the, you know, Pharaoh let Moses' people go, and then it was the parting of the Red Sea, and then the crashing of the waves, and then, you know, the Pharaoh and lots of his legions were killed, and then Moses and his people, you know, wandered around the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, or 40 years. Okay, so this is the story that we've been told. And I really talk about how the story of Moses was not really written down until about the earliest it could possibly have been written down was around 950 to 750 BC. And it took place around 1250 BC. So a lot of it, there was probably a lot of creative license taken, but I actually go back to the original documents of ancient Egypt that talk about what actually happened, and that's really covered at length in my Sophia book. But in the story, even the story that we have, which probably has been, you know, used for a colorful cultural support of the underdog achieving greatness because he was overseen by a god, or God with the big G or little g, depending on how you look at it. We have the story about Moses, and there's a lot of remarkable things in this story if you really take a look at it. First, of course, we have that out in the desert when the Hebrews are wandering around for 40 years. We have things like manna coming down from the sky. Well, what was manna? That's a good question. And supposedly they lived on manna for a long time. They only got meat about 4 or 5 times, supposedly, according to the Old Testament, all that time. And of course, we have the story with of this roaring of flames that came down on top of a mountain, much like a spaceship would, not a UFO, a quiet UFO, but some kind of rocket ship. And that Moses was called up to the top of this mountain to have this very profound encounter that, changed his life and changed the life of really millions of people since then, because this was the time when he was given the Ten Commandments, which were basic laws of justice for people to live by. So we have to ask, was this an encounter with God, with the big G, or one of the gods who was very, very powerful, perhaps, and had very powerful technology? So was it an encounter with an extraterrestrial? This is an interesting question to ponder. We certainly have a lot of remarkable things, like how did the waters part for the Red Sea? Was it like some kind of a beam, literally, that came out of a ship and pushed the waters to the side? Did the serpent staff that he was carrying actually have certain powers? It seems like it did. We really don't have the answers, but this is a pretty extraordinary thing. You don't really hear about anybody parting something as large as a gigantic lake or a gigantic sea, except in this story. And that you can see here in this depiction, they're following a column of light. And we hear this throughout even the Old Testament, when they're talking about how when the people were going around the desert, they actually were following this column of fire by night and what they called the glory of the Lord that looked like a shining cloud by day. And so we kind of have to ask, what was that? And then we have the story of the burning bush. This was a bush that shone very, very, very brightly in day or night, but it did not burn. So, they did not know about things like electricity or laser beams or huge searchlights coming down from craft at that time. So it's quite possible that this was actually some mechanical thing that was happening. And so, if you remember, when he came down from the mountain, he had radiation burns on his face. Took him quite a long time to heal. Well, during that encounter, he was given these blue lapis tablets, and they were engraved with, almost like a laser stylus. And some say there were 10 commandments. Some say there were actually 12. If you actually read the ancient Essene documents, they claim that there were 12. And so it wasn't just don't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. It was also, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule, which was wonderful. That was one of the additional ones. And it was also, I think, about being kind to the importance of being kind to women. And of course, we see that those kind of things they got lost someplace along the way, which would have made a difference, wouldn't it? So here's our pillar of fire by night. So, if you can see sort of the glory of the Lord being something that was happening up here in the cloud cover, it was almost like some kind of either a beam of light from a ship, perhaps, or, I don't think that they'd have to create that much exhaust, but they call it a pillar of fire. We followed the pillar of fire by night, and the glory of the Lord by day. And so the aerial object, which they didn't know words like space capsules, rocket ships, unidentified flying object, that we use today, they called it the glory of the Lord. So obviously it was something that shone very brightly. It was quite astonishing to them, cloaked in a cloud by day and looked like a pillar of fire by night. So these are some of the clues we have from that story. Moses had radiation burns, which we know have been associated with people who have really close encounters with some spaceships, not all, but some certainly. When he came down from the mountain, his face was all like burned. When he came down, if you remember, he was so disgusted by his own people partying while he was gone that he threw the tablets down and broke them, and he had to go back up the mountain, and he was given these blue lapis tablets and that were written that again, where he actually this time had to write himself with this laser stylus, which sounds like very advanced technology. So he had to rewrite those 10 commandments. And then of course people on the ground heard this incredible roaring and flames and belching. It was very scary for them on the mountaintop. And then of course we have the burning bush. So those are we have to ask, do we have any evidence that modern day UFOs act like this? Well, here's a picture of a UFO where there does seem to be some kind of a light beam that's shot down to the surface. Of some description. Here we have another one, and the glory of the Lord. Here's this cloud cover, and here's a beam of light shot down. So we can see that there are some correlations. So it's possible that this was that kind of encounter. Here we have an incredible UFO, totally cloaked in clouds, but luminous, the glory of the Lord shown all about us, right? Well, that would look pretty big, wouldn't it? This was one that was seen in Moscow in 2011. So you can see there are some correlations here. Then we have the story of Ezekiel's chariots of fire. If you remember, Ezekiel was an Old Testament prophet, and he described, seeing wheels within wheels. Well, lots of artists have tried to figure out what the wheels within wheels might look like. Here's, one version of reality here, and but this is probably more like it. Here we have a 14th century painting, literally, of the Annunciation of Mary, where we see this, UFO with these lights, but in the same exact formation, but it's covered by a cloud, and it's sending a beam of light down to actually strike Mary on the forehead in this particular medieval painting. So this is wheels within wheels. Ezekiel reported seeing it. So again, you can see the similarity in modern day encounters and ancient encounters, where the people who were painting these things or describing them really didn't have the nomenclature or the language that we have today to try to communicate it. They did the very best that they could, and I'm sure it was quite awe-inspiring, just like it is for us today in the 20th century, where we have computers and rocket ships. When we see one of these ships, we're still very excited and jumping up and down. So imagine how it would have been 1,000 years ago during the Middle Ages, or how it would have been 5,000 years ago during the time of the Old Testament prophets. Then we have stories of Apollo's chariots of fire. Again, artists have done their very best to try to depict what a chariot looked like in that day and age. Was something that was drawn by a horse. And of course, we get the word carriage from chariot, and we get the word car or cars from chariot. So it was a transportation vehicle of some sort, but it shone very brightly. And, we get the word horsepower from the fact that what pulled chariots in the past were horses. Okay, so this is actually a picture of Ahura Mazda, who is a Persian deity, and you can see he's in what appears to be a round ship with landing struts, and whether these wings are solar panels or whether they're just symbolic representations of the fact that this ship could fly, we don't really know. But this would have been another chariot of fire from the Persian culture. And here's another depiction, but we see this time that Apollo is in a circle. He's in what appears to be a round ship. And of course, Apollo or Horus's symbols were the horse, pardon me, the dolphins, because of course he was all through the Mediterranean, and also the hawk, because Apollo was actually the Greek name for Horus, and of course Horus appeared to be a hawk or a falcon. He was called the Falcon of the Horizon, the Falcon of the Two Horizons in Egypt, because of this ship. So here is a light ship, okay, that, certainly appears to be a luminous ship, a ship of fire, a chariot of fire, a car or vehicle that transported him from horizon to horizon, the Falcon of the Two Horizons. This is what they're talking about. This was shot by Carlos Diaz, who is a amazing contactee down in South America, or Mexico, who's had ongoing contact with very advanced, positive, telepathic, benevolent extraterrestrials, totally human-looking extraterrestrials, ongoing for probably about 20 years. And again, we have another depiction of Ahura Mazda. This time, he's not only in a round ship, but he's carrying a bow and arrow, which is, not something you would think God with the big G would do. it would be more like God with a little g, one of the gods. So now, did we have these flying craft in the past? For those of you who have tuned into some of my other presentations know that I presented ample evidence, but I'm going to bring a little of that evidence to bear in this presentation. Long ago in India, they call these flying crafts Vimana, and certainly during the time of Atlantis, we had attained very high levels of technology, and we had all sorts of planes and flying ships and so forth. In India, there actually is a book that has been passed down through the Hindu tradition with the Puranas and the Upanishads and the Vedas and so forth. That is a book that actually has diagrams of a lot of these flying machines, these flying UFOs or flying spaceships or flying Vimanas. And you can see the name Vimana, Vimatnika Sastra, or the science of aeronautics. And this was literally all about machines. And so I'll just show you some of the diagrams here. This is a drawing done in 1923 from the description within the Vimana text. And this seems to be some kind of a large, mothership of some sort. It's shaped like a Vesica Pisces, and it has obviously some kind of a tail, whether this is the propulsion system, has wings, okay, or whether it's some kind of a rudder, we don't really know. But here is a drawing of another Vimana. Almost looks like a crown, doesn't it? Like the crown that a king would wear. And there's steps going up into the entrance of the Vimana, and we don't know, of course, if the whole thing is the ship or if the ship is just this big and it's landed on a platform. And a lot of the flat top pyramids or ziggurats were used literally as landing platforms for these ships. These are other depictions that artists have created through the years for Vimanas. So here we have, probably it's Rama and Sita, or it could be Krishna and Radha. So we literally have, a flying chariot with, they're going up into the sky. And to emphasize that, even though the horses don't have any wings, we have a flying bird because they're getting into the bird's territory. And look how much bigger these beings are than the humans down here. Okay, the humans appear to be smaller. Now, these are small depictions of Krishna. So, we're going to be looking at evidence that there were these very tall beings all over the world in just a little while. Here's another one where it looks like a small, almost like a round ship with a dome, and we have no idea what these are, if these are wings or some kind of propulsion system. But again, these are drawings that people have done through the last couple of hundred years as they've attempted to get their heads around way before the Wright brothers came along and flight was normal and commercial and something taken for granted like it is today. They were trying to understand what in the Sam Hill these things could have looked like. Here's another one. And again, we can see it appears to kind of be like that, that crown that I was talking about. These are kind of shapes like that. The fire is coming out of the base, and then to stabilize it, you've got these four jets on either side. So very interesting. In January of 2015, former pilot turned Arthur Ananda J. Bodhi said Maharishi Bar Darwa, a sage of the Vedic period that lived around 1500 to 500 BC. That's a very big span, isn't it? About 1,000 years, so they're not clear when he lived, had laid down as many as 500 guidelines on flying in one of the ancient Hindu texts much before Leonardo da Vinci's 15th century ideas for flying machines and the American Wright brothers' first flight in 1903. So again, we sort of see something almost looks like a step pyramid or a ziggurat of some description with a little piece at the top. This one is another Vimana. It looks very much like the one that I said looked like a mothership with a tail at the back. We don't see the wings here. You could imagine this being almost being like a submersible. So it was something maybe that went into the water, but these are flying machines as well. So it had the capacity, much like a dirigible perhaps, to be able to fly. The Maharishi defined an airplane as a vehicle which could even travel from one planet to another. Imagine that idea, 500 BC. That's just incredible. 1500 BC. Bodas said before adding that some of the jumbo airplanes of ancient India had 40 small engines and could move not only forward but backward as well, much as we see UFOs moving today. The Maharishi defined an airplane as a vehicle which could travel from one planet to another, Bodas said, before adding that some of the jumbo airplanes of ancient India had the engines that could move backward and forward. And again, we see on this rock, we see the same kind of, almost like a king's helmet, but it's clearly a UFO. It's landed probably on the top of one of these landing platforms or ziggurats. We see another one over here. And we see these beings that seem to have incredible halos. So these are not normal human beings. These are either enlightened human beings or they are enlightened beings from another planet that have come to visit, using this spacecraft. Here we see the same kind of evidence with French coins and Phoenician coins. Here is a French one. It's a countryside scene. Here's a man. He's looking up, and what he's actually got here, he's looking at a gigantic either flying mushroom or a UFO. There's clouds in the sky, and you can see again there's either some kind of blast underneath or light coming down, because it does appear to have some kind of stem on it. But you can see literally the details with these little rivets or lights around the corner. Now, you know how hard it is to get a coin minted today. Something big has to happen. So imagine how important this event was that they were willing to mint a coin around it. Similarly, here we have in Phoenician coins, the same kind of thing here. Some guys down here in battle, you see their spears pointing up, and suddenly over the battle, a UFO, very much like the one 1,000 years later in France, shows up with the same kind of things with the little, either the lights around the edges or the rivets, and quite incredible. And here's a Phoenician one where, you've got some kind of an animal here. It seems to have a fish tail, and maybe it's a goat, like a Capricorn kind of animal, but it's got wings to it. And we're going to take a look at whether or not some of these beings actually really existed. That's a big question. So similarly, when we look back, I'm just put a few of these in here. I have, a whole slew of them, but we have a lot to cover on a lot of different topics. So we see in this incredible painting of Mary, the mother with Jesus down below, we see a man looking up at what appears to be a flying machine with light around it. And that's a close-up. Again, it's got some kind of a rim, and it's got lights coming off of it. And this is a detail of the man here. And this is the big picture to give some context for this. So, this looks to me very, very similar to a modern UFO sighting from the United Kingdom in 2011. This is the baptism of Christ showing a UFO. Again, quite extraordinary. This was painted in 1710. So number one, imagine the mind of the person that was the artist that painted this. What was it that was being passed in the secret histories in the underground stream of the mysteries or the mystery schools? Did they in fact know that we've been visited by higher dimensional beings, by extraterrestrials, by beings that perhaps had light ships and light bodies, as William was talking about, and did these have anything to do with overseeing the birth of Jesus? Perhaps, he had volunteered to come down here to try to awaken humanity and raise humanity up. And so, if there were, let's say, higher dimensional beings, or we can call them extraterrestrials, involved in Jesus's birth and overseeing his mission, does it in any way invalidate his mission? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, it's quite possible. What are angels anyway? Are they extraterrestrial? I would say they're not only extraterrestrial, that meaning beyond this earth, but they're also interdimensional or transdimensional, or higher dimensional. And certainly these ships could have been physical, but they could certainly have been beings from the fifth dimension where the masters dwell, or the sixth dimension, or the seventh dimension. They could have been beings from anywhere. So pretty interesting painting. Amazing that it has survived, the Vatican. Um, these are similar kinds of images that we see in modern day times from Ed Walter's Florida sightings. Again, this one kind of is like the king's crown, but you see the little rivets around the edges, extremely similar. This is another one from 1383 to 1440. This is the birth lifespan of this particular artist, Marcellino da Panicali. Sorry, my Italian's not that great. It's called Miracle of the Snow. And so, you've got a classic sort of Middle Ages town, looks like Verona or something, where they're literally looking up and all these ships covered in clouds have shown up. And they believe that Jesus and Mary were riding in one of the ships. And this painting now hangs currently at the Church of Santa Maria in Florence, Italy. So again, astonishing that it survived, astonishing that it was even painted, and that people have been looking at it for hundreds of years, probably thinking, gosh, what the heck does that mean? Were they, ETs? Were they higher dimensional beings that came to help our planet? Good question. So here we are in Utah. These again are modern day sightings. You can see this is a ship with all of its layers, but it's covered in clouds. So they certainly have the capacity, some of them to go completely invisible, some of them to surround themselves in a cloud cover, although, clearly these are very hard edges, so there's something underneath it. It's not like this kind of cloud up here. And here we see the glory of the Lord, these profound, large ships of light that are awe-inspiring even to us today. So we can see just from these little examples that we've been being visited by the gods for a long time. And when you go back and a lot of religious history and spiritual history, and even the histories of the founding of the nations, we discover that that there are human beings that have been being visited by these light beings for a long period of time. And you can see this is not an ordinary third dimensional being. This is probably at least a fifth dimensional being with this profound light coming from his body, who is able, I'm sure, to coalesce the molecules of his body down for a short period of time into the third dimension. But it would be like having a size 10 foot and trying to put yourself into a size 7 shoe. It would definitely be tight on your feet. So imagine someone who is at this higher vibrational being having so much love for their fellow souls who are struggling in the darkness of their own ignorance, to be willing to come for a period of time into a third dimensional body to live a normal human life as Jesus did, and some of the other great avatars have done. But some of these just have come to visit. And in some cases, they wound up bringing knowledge, information, holy books and texts. In some cases, they wound up sleeping with the women and giving them children that were part human and part higher dimensional, or the gods. And these were called many times called the demigods. We see that in India with the 5 princes, that were in the Mahabharata. Prince Arjuna is the most famous of these. And of course, we hear about it with the Greek gods, and look at the difference in the size here. If he stood up, he'd probably be at least, 12 feet or something, and maybe she's, 5 or 6 feet, something like that, a normal human. So they were quite a bit larger than we were. And they became teachers of mankind. I mean, if they really wanted to come down here and take over the planet, they could have done so. They had the technology, they had the intelligence, they had the sophistication, but that's really not what happened. We see that they acted as inspirers to humans. And certainly there were, let us say, some of these extraterrestrial visitors who probably came down to visit and left. They came down to teach and they left. Some came because, like with the story of the Anunnaki, we'll talk about this a bit later, they had needs for their own planet, and it took them a long time to be able to mine the gold that they needed to repair their own atmosphere. So in that case, they wound up staying for an incredibly long period of time, and some of them really fell in love with humanity, and they really brought us the arts and sciences that are the foundation for all civilizations. And certainly they weren't perfect. Some of those probably were more third or fourth dimensional. They weren't all ascended masters, but some of them were incredibly aware. Thoth and Isis and Osiris and Horus, the Ptah, these are some of the ones that William was talking about earlier that I teach about in the mystery school. So just like humans, one size doesn't fit all. Some humans are very conscious and aware, and others are asleep at the wheel, and others are out there actually doing dastardly deeds that are hurting the animals, the environment, the humans, and so forth. So we have a wide range. And with the gods, they were a very lawful society, but some of them were much more, materialistically based. Let's get in, get our gold, and get out. Let's not get too attached. Others were like, hey, how can we do some good while we're down here? How can we pass knowledge or wisdom on? And so that's what happened. So we find these gods in virtually every culture of the world. It wasn't just, the Anunnaki in Sumeria. And so the question becomes, were they from one civilization or were they from many? And I think that they were probably from many. The Native American twisted hair tradition, which I'm trained in one of my initiatory paths, claims that there were at least 12 extraterrestrial races that seeded the planet Earth, including beings from the Pleiades, from Sirius, from Orion, from the Lyran system, from Andromeda, and so forth. But certainly one of the things that we have been looking at is the Anunnaki, and we'll be talking more about the Anunnaki in this presentation, but I don't think that they were the only group that was down here. Most of these other civilizations were completely human. Some of them could have been lighter skin, darker skin, taller, shorter. They could have been, only in one geographic region of the world and not expanded. Some of them could have crash landed here and thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to live? And it depended on what their body types were as to whether or not our sun was too bright for them or too hot for them. Ones that have really large eyes, a lot of times they come from planets where the light isn't as bright as our planet. So our sun becomes a very challenging thing for them to survive on a daily basis, because their organs were originally developed on a planet where they needed larger eyes and perhaps didn't have the protection in their skin for brighter sun. So we want to take a look at some of the gods in these various cultures, and of course here we're looking at Sumerian, but in some cases I think the Sumerian gods were simply known because they travel so widely, and they were known in the Greek by one set of names, maybe the Roman by another set of names, the Norse by another set of names, but they may well have been literally the same beings. And one of the ways you can sort of start to try to figure out this correlation is to look at their symbols. For example, Zeus, his symbol was the eagle, and he was actually the Sumerian god Ninurta that we'll be talking about later. He was the oldest son of Enlil, who was the chief of gods, who promised his oldest son Ninurta that when I leave, you'll be the chief of the gods. And so obviously there was a period of probably a few thousand years where Ninurta got to take the reins of power. He became known as Zeus in the Roman and as Jupiter in the Greek. But you can see from his symbols what this is the same being. Of course, we have the Norse god Odin, and of course Odin doesn't he also has a connection with the eagle, but we see the raven with him. Now, so was Odin, a later version? Once the Norse gods, what we do know is that there was around 2150 BC, there was, with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Middle East, there was a lot of radiation that happened, and that's a bigger story. But a lot of the gods fled, and they went up to the Ireland, England, the Norse country. So it's possible that Odin and the ones we know up there were the renamed version of the Sumerian gods. But it's also possible that the Norse gods predate 2150 BC, going back to the time of Atlantis, or after Atlantis, as part of the expedition. So was Odin the same as Enlil? We don't know. Was Odin the same as Ninurta or Zeus? We really don't know. But we know in the Norse mythology, he was the head of the gods, very much as Jupiter was. And if you sort of look at how they painted this particular staff, it's a staff that looks like Jupiter or Zeus's staff of power. So, we're just in a process of trying to put this puzzle together, because so much has been hidden from us for so long. And researchers like myself and the other speakers in this conference are people who have been doing the research to be able to try to reconstruct some of this history for ourselves. We have the Roman goddess Rhea, or Juno. Okay, and so and her symbols were the swan. So she was actually married to Jupiter, Juno and Jupiter. Okay, so this would have been Ninurta's wife, basically. Now, Demeter is a different goddess altogether. Let me just make that really clear. Demeter was the Roman or the Greek version of Isis, the goddess of the grains. But the reason I put this image in here is I want you to see the difference in the size. Look how much bigger she is than the human being that's standing beside her. Almost nobody ever comments about this. And, maybe we thought that they had big egos. Let's make me really big because I was such a big god. Maybe has nothing to do with their egos, but it's actually a literal presentation of the differences in their body size, which could have been 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 feet, and our body size. And I'm going to show you some more evidence for this as we go along. This is the Greek Athena on this side and the Greek Apollo. Now, of course, in the Egyptian, Apollo, the god of healing, the god of music, also the oracle god, he was Horus, and that's how he was known. And by the time the Greeks got a hold of it, he became the son of Zeus, which wasn't really true. He was the son of Osiris and Isis. But Osiris, his father, died. I'm sure that Zeus took a interest in him because he was really a high vibration, moral, enlightened being. And then we have Athena. Athena was probably the Egyptian goddess Neth. Most people don't know who Neth was, but Neth, I really love Neth. She had to do with the eternal net of space-time, and she many times was shown with arrows and a quiver on her back, much as Athena is. So you have to look at the symbols and do your history reading to be able to try to put all this stuff together. We have the Greek Hephaestus, and he was kind of also like the Vulcan, Roman Vulcan. Probably may have been the same because we know he was a smithy. It's also possible that Hephaestus could have been the Greek version of Ptah. Ptah was, the Egyptian version. So it always starts off with their real Sumerian identity. So that would have been Enki. And then it comes to the Egyptian name. So Enki was Ptah, the Pa, or the father of humanity. And then, later, thousands of years later, when the Greeks really, as the Greek historian Herodotus said, we Greeks learned everything we ever knew of any importance from the Egyptians, including the gods. But of course, they changed the names because they had a different language. So Hephaestus could have been Ptah, or it could have been the Roman Vulcan, the smithy. So, again, we're having to put it together. Venus or Aphrodite, same person. She is basically Ishtar. And Ishtar was the original Sumerian Inanna. Inanna was the daughter of Nannar, the moon god, and the granddaughter of Enlil, the head of all the gods. So she was the granddaughter of the head of all the gods. And she was a Beba Rama. She was supposed to be really beautiful, and she great sexual wiles, and she had a male twin brother whose name was Utu, also known as Shamash. He was a sun god, but they used to fly UFOs together. And so she was a kick-ass, take names kind of girl. She could fight, but she was also a lover. And she was beautiful. Everyone fell in love with her. So she became known as Venus or Aphrodite. The Greek healer Chiron, and Chiron was a centaur. So did centaurs exist? We're going to be taking a look at some evidence that centaurs in fact may have existed, as well as satyrs and some of the other mythological beings like dragons. I'm going to show you some evidence for that in just a bit. So Chiron was a centaur who was said to be a master healer. In the story, he was wounded by a poison arrow, but he was so long-lived he couldn't die, but he was in a lot of agony from the pain, and so eventually he asked the gods to be put up in heaven. And so now it's the name of a planetoid called Chiron that goes around every 50 years. It represents in astrology the wounded healer that becomes the master healer if you heal your own wounds. I'm an astrologer, so I happen to really like Chiron. It wasn't even discovered till I think 1975, but it's a really interesting, it's bigger than a moon, smaller than a planet, but it does really have some powerful energies. You can see here the difference again in the size, because these centaurs would have come from the Anunnaki planet, where they were really larger because the planet itself is much larger than ours. And you can see this is Apollo, who was the half or this was actually the son of Apollo, who was Aesculapius. Apollo took Aesculapius to be trained by in healing for the humans by Chiron. So this is kind of really interesting story, but look at the difference in the sizes. That's kind of one of the reasons I chose this image. And then of course you have the Greek version, or the Roman Mercury, the Greek Hermes, same being as Thoth basically. And he definitely was supposed to have those winged sandals where he could fly, and you see the wings on his helmet, the messenger of the god of wisdom. These are such long-lived beings that thousands and thousands of years are nothing for them. And entire human civilizations rise and fall, rise and fall. And so every new civilization winds up calling them something different. And of course, they have to adapt. Then we have the Norse Thor. Of course, we all know that Chris Helmsworth is just the perfect Thor. What a hunk he is. I talk about a Beba Rama. He's a hunk of Rama. He's gorgeous. But, here we have the pictures of Thor here. Who was Thor? He could have been the Sumerian Adad, ADAD, who was, again, nice, but he's very known for his hammer and striking with his hammer, and justice. The Celtic Bridget, Brigid, the bride, she was known as a world civilizer up in England and in ancient Britain, and in the Scotland and Ireland. She was a smithy. She brought music and dance and writing and the arts. Sounds like definitely one of the goddesses, doesn't she? And she brought illumination and teaching, and also the arts of healing. This definitely sounds like one of the Anunnaki. Cernunnos, he's another gorgeous man here, an illustration, of course, but he was the king of the forest, and he was able to communicate telepathically with the animals. And of course, if you were in those long Celtic winters, it became very important to, occasionally have fresh meat. So the ability to protect the animals, but also to have an animal sacrifice themselves so that the tribe could eat. And, he's shown with these horns or antlers, which of course is the Celtic version of what were the earlier horns that we see in ancient Egypt with Hathor. Here's Hathor, and hear those horns. Okay, and there's a lot to be said about what these horns are, and the point in the middle. We can talk about the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, and the point of union where we open the third eye. You can see the third eye open here in the middle for whole brain thinking. This is what Jesus says: when you make the two eyes into one, the inner into the outer, the male into the female into the male, then you should see the kingdom of heaven. So he's talking about the spiritual technology of awakening, spiritual awakening. We can see the serpent here, the two serpents actually, that have to do with the Inda and the Pingala moving up the spine to activate the Kundalini and awaken the third eye. And you see even other hermetic symbols here, like the wings. This is Isis and Nephthys, the two goddesses that represent the lunar goddess Nephthys and the solar goddess Isis. Again, we're talking about our masculine nature and our feminine nature. And when we bring them both into union and activation in this center point of illumination, we attain, here's the Ankh, eternal life. Okay, and here's the Shen, the symbol for kingship. We have the finite and the infinite, masculine and feminine in perfect union together. Here's Thoth, the Egyptian Thoth, writing in the Book of Life, God of wisdom. Here's Poseidon, who was, of course, very big in ancient Atlantis. He actually set up all of Atlantis. So Poseidon may have actually been his own person. There are stories that he came from the Pleiades, and he was very tall and, of course, human. Also, you see these winged horses or winged chariot, but it's possible that's who he was. It's also possible he was a Sumerian god that I'll talk about a bit later. The Egyptian goddess Bast, she was the goddess of love and joy and marijuana, and which was legal, yay, and beer. Okay, and once a year they had a party, a big festival in Bubastis, where 70,000 people came down the Nile to party hardy for one entire week. It was the second largest festival in all of Egypt. The first one was the festival of Isis and Osiris, but this was Bast. So she was the goddess of play and joy. And then her aunt was Sekhmet. Sekhmet was the goddess of healing, but also of war, very, very fierce fire goddess. And you see she's one who's awakened her third eye. Here's the Uraeus, representing the Kundalini serpent energy that's come up and finally come out here in the third eye. So she's one who has awakened her halo and is conscious. So here's the Celtic Caradwen. Caradwen is a goddess of the pot or the cauldron of the alchemy of life. She's a goddess who, there's stories about her. You can see some of her symbols, the faithful dog, the black swan, and so forth. Rhiannon, this is another one. She was one of the Tuatha De Danann, the people of Danu, or the people of Anu. This is part of the Anunnaki, I'm sure, that went up into the Celtic lands. You remember that the head of the Anunnaki planet was called Anu, and so the Tuatha De Danann are the people of Danu, or the goddess Danu, who I'm sure was named for Anu, and Rhiannon was one of those. So these are some of the goddesses that went up into that area. Here's Isis, Mother of Wisdom. We know her, and she's normally seen with the 3 steps of the crown of Isis, but sometimes she's also seen with Hathor's crown. This is Hathor's crown. So again, just by knowing the crowns, you can kind of figure out who's who's who you're looking at. So, and this is actually the vulture goddess here, Mut, goddess of, it's like the dark mother, the black hole behind the visible universe. So again, these are all Hermetic symbols. And who's kneeling here is Ma'at. Ma'at is the goddess of truth, cosmic truth and cosmic law. So the Tuatha De Danann, let's speak of them. They had different names, but they were said to be human, beautiful, shining, like the fairies, the fae. They inhabited the Celtic lands for a long time until finally the humans came and took over. And so then they allowed the humans to take over, and they went underground, probably into underground cities. Those mounds were called Shea, Sidhe. We wouldn't pronounce it that way, but that's how it was pronounced in the ancient world. And so they even became called Shea. But again, these were glorious beings, highly aware, educated, luminous with light from the inside out, who had their own culture, much as we think of the elves today, like the ones in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, so beautifully portrayed in those movies by Peter Jackson. The Shay, or the Tuatha De Danann, were the fairy folk. They were tall, they were elegant, they were conscious, they were aware. You see the flying symbols on the ankles, much as we see with Hermes or Mercury and so forth. So here's Freya in the Norse lands, and again we see the winged helmet and this point in the middle, talking about, is she one of the bird tribe people, one of the people who came out of the sky? This is Sudra, goddess of the sun. Again, is this a crown, or is this representational of her halo, or her having activated her light body? Very good question. And you can see her symbol is the sunflower. So, I think it has to do with the luminosity. But there was a luminosity to the Anunnaki. This is an Indian culture. Certainly we know that there are civilizations in the fourth dimension, the fifth dimension, other planets that are these grand, very peaceful cultures. But there are stories throughout the Indian culture of the visitation of some of these beings, and they're said to have been, 20 feet tall, 30 feet tall. Here's Shiva, and he has many symbols. There's the snake of Kundalini awakening, the sickle moon that represents the movement. The moon is the quickest moving celestial body in our solar system. It has many phases, from the dark moon to the waxing, the waning, the full moon, and so forth. So there's a lot of reasons why the moon is one of his symbols. It has to do with being a god of change, a god of death, and then transformation, alteration, because if nothing died, nothing new could ever be born. You have to allow this alchemical transformation to take place. And we see other symbols like the trident. Here is the Trinity, the white cow. They don't kill cows in India, as most of us know. Thank goodness for the cows. They treat them with great respect. Durga. We see the same Trinity clearly from the same advanced culture. Durga is depicted with many arms. She's both a goddess of love, but also a goddess of war, much like we hear Sekhmet being. She's linked, like Sybil in the Groman, to the lions and to the tigers. She's usually shown riding a tiger or a lion, much as Freya is up in the Norse, much as Sybil is in the Roman, where she has a chariot being pulled by lions. So again, are these the same goddesses? Are they actually different goddesses? Are they goddesses from the same tribe? Again, you have to look at the symbols. In this situation, Durga, I actually really love Durga. She's great. in my mystery school, I had a saying, we should have bumper stickers saying, "What would Durga do?" Because she certainly can be the goddess of love and compassion and kindness, who spins the universe into being here. Um, who offers a lotus flower of enlightenment, who sounds the conch shell of awakening. But, she can also kick ass and take names. So she can cut through the bullshit with the sword of truth. She has perfect aim. She has the mace that says, if you uh, err on the side of untruthfulness, we'll call you out on this. So what would Durga do? She's the perfect goddess for all occasions. The Native American white buffalo calf woman, it was actually said, I've been told by Native elders, she was actually blue-eyed and blonde, unlike how we think of her today. And she came supposedly from the Pleiades. Her story is a powerful story that some say 9,000 years ago, when the people were still recovering from the flood and starving. She appeared to them, and she taught them the 7 sacred rites of the people, or of the Sioux people, which included the Inipi Sweat Lodge, where you go in and you literally listen and tune your heartbeat with the heartbeat of the earth, which is the 7.6 megahertz, which is the cycle heartbeat of all great healers. She taught them the keeping of relatives, the keeping of the soul of the dead. For a year, you had to become a holy person to do that. The making of blood brothers, the sun dance ceremony, where you dance for 4 days and 4 nights, hoping to make this divine connection with the celestial kingdoms. And she also taught them the Chanupa ceremony, which is about keeping the masculine and the feminine in balance. The stem is the masculine, the bowl is the feminine. The eagle feathers that come from it have to do with honoring the winged and the four-leggeds and the animals, and the wood of the stem has to do with honoring the trees and the standing people. And when you put your male and female together in balance in the world and send your prayers to heaven with the spiral of the smoke going up, then you'll be connected with the universe. And these were all great teachings, and she predicted she would come back at the end of this age. So these are all teachings that were brought from the star people. Then we have the Kachinas. The Native Americans talk about these tall beings that come down from the mountains, much as, Moses with the, Mount Sinai or Mount Carmel or Mount Hermon, many of these great mountains. And many times they disguise themselves so the people, won't really see exactly what they look like, but they bring wisdom. Tall beings from the sky who met the people on top of mountaintops. And you could call these the bird tribe people, because they had the ability to fly, whether literally or in ships themselves. So what can we surmise from the things we've looked at? These beings, they look human. Every one of these beings, with the exception of the Kachinas that have masks on, they look human. But they are bigger than us. They live longer than us because the same beings come back again and again over thousands of years in many different cultures. They had the ability to travel all over the world because we see them everywhere. And sometimes they appear to be the same being, but in different cultures with a different name. They had advanced technology, things that our ancestors didn't really understand but tried to describe. They had knowledge that we didn't have, and they shared some of that knowledge with us. They were teachers to mankind, and they might even have the ability to shapeshift, because we see some of this described in especially the Greek and the Roman literature, where Zeus, for example, is chasing a human girl, and she changes into one thing, he changes into another to follow her, and so forth and so on. In addition, they appear to be very telepathic, to be able to communicate mind to mind, much as we hear that many of the extraterrestrials can do today. They seem to have the ability, at least some of them, to send dreams to humans, to enter our minds and help give us visions or dreams, whether they do that through, mental, more advanced mental powers. We use, 7 to 10% of our brain on a good day. So that would tend to indicate that perhaps there's a lot more, capacity that we have to be able to affect and to use our minds than we're currently using. And they obviously had more access to their brains. And they did actually seem to be concerned about the welfare of society. And this is one thing that is very disturbing for me in the UFO movement today. There's a lot of wonderful researchers out there, and I honor all of them. But there's a whole fear-based agenda that we're being sold by Hollywood, by the cabal, by the shadow government, by the people who really don't want us to make friends with the extraterrestrials. They want to keep us in fear because fear allows them to control us. And there's even been talk that they have long been building up to the whole idea of, improving their technology to the point where they have their own UFOs, which they do today, and they stage abductions to scare the bejeebers out of people with their own military personnel, which we know there are lots of reports about that. Stephen Greer has talked about that. Melissa Leslie in LA, another UFO researcher, has talked about that. But they actually may be planning to stage a coup with holographic technology where it looks like they're going to take over the world in order for us to, just like 9/11, to say, oh, in the name of safety and security, we give up our rights. We allow ourselves to be searched at airports and just, micromanaged to the point that, not a dollar passes through the radiation screens, but that they know it. And so I think that this is one of the big concerns, is that, if these extraterrestrials wanted to take over the world, they certainly could have done so. Anybody who's got, faster than light technology is way ahead of us. But I think that the powers that be have an agenda to keep us in fear, and that they really might want to try to stage something like this if we're not wise enough to really realize what's going on, which is why seminars like this are so important. A lot of these races are really so much more advanced than we are in spirit and in consciousness, not to mention technology, that they should be our teachers, and we should be opening up to welcome learning what we can from them, which is why I think they make contact with people at a one-on-one basis. Like myself, I've had contact since I was a little girl, and I've had very, very benevolent, positive experiences with real high consciousness teachers, which is why I teach today and try to spread this information. So when we go back to the Bible, we also have what appears to be mostly positive tales, because these beings appear to come in really important times in world history. And again, you can see the angel wings and the luminous being of light, talking with the humans here. So, for example, there was the angel that appeared to Daniel in the lion's den. This is when the Hebrews had been taken into custody in ancient Persia, or Babylon, sorry, in Babylon. And, the Babylonians were trying to decide who to let live and who not to let live. And they wound up letting all the Jews live for 50 years. They didn't let them build physical temples, but they let them go their own way. And in part, it was because of this remarkable thing that happened where this angel appeared behind Daniel, and the lions didn't eat him, basically. And then, of course, we have the appearance of the angel during, the to the shepherds in the field. We have angels that appeared to be totally human. So when I talk about shape-shifting, if they're normally 15 feet tall and you can shrink yourself down to 7 feet tall, that appears to be shape shifting of some sort. Abraham offered him tea, if you remember, and the whole story where they tell him he's going to be the father of nations, but actually, he was too old. I think Sarah was like, I don't remember what it was, 70 years old or something like that. So she wasn't, menstruating anymore, and he probably wasn't like so potent anymore. And so basically when she got pregnant, it was, as they said in the Old Testament, because the Lord came into her. That's a nice way, a sanitized way of saying, she was artificially inseminated, or probably didn't actually physically have sex with an extraterrestrial because she was a little too old, but they artificially inseminated her, and then that's when she had, Jacob. So, or it was it Isaac? Right. I think it was Isaac, who was the father of Jacob. So then we have the story of the angel that appeared in the Garden of Eden. This is another kind of critical story in a lot of the Judeo-Christian literature. The angel that tells Abraham to spare Isaac. So this was his son, Isaac, his only son until I think the yeah, it was his only son by Sarah. So he actually wouldn't have been the sperm donor. I want you guys to notice that it would have been the extraterrestrials who were the sperm donor, because it wasn't happening otherwise. So then there's the story of Raphael. Many of you may know this if you're Catholic. He's one of the 4 archangels mentioned in the Bible, where he helps this young boy who's trying to go by himself to get medicine to help his father get well, and Raphael shows up and gives young Tobias the remedy to how to heal the sickness for his father. The angelic messenger Gabriel that comes to Mary during the Annunciation to announce the fact that she also has an immaculate conception. In other words, the Lord came into her. How did that happen? I mean, it's certainly possible that someone with enough spiritual energy could, literally activate an ovum in a woman. We do know that there are other cases of immaculate conception. But if there is no father sperm donor, the child is always born a female, and she's always a clone of the actual mother, because that's the only DNA that's available. However, if the father offers his genetic material, or the extraterrestrial offers their genetic material, then suddenly, you can have a male or a female, and you have a completely unique combination or being. So it's quite possible that Mary was artificially inseminated by these great lords of light, whether energetically or physically, in order to create a body that was genetically able to hold the spirit of someone like Issa or Jesus, because a higher consciousness soul coming needs a higher consciousness body. So of course then there are also angels that sent dreams to Joseph, Jesus's father or legal father, to flee to Egypt so that they would not be killed. So some people have called these messengers angels, and that's actually what angels mean. And I talk about that. And I also have spoken in some of my presentations where I actually show all sorts of pictures of light beings that are not physical. So I think it's important for people to realize that there are higher dimensional light beings that are guides that are what we think of as classic angels. In other words, they are not taking, they haven't been down to the 3rd dimension. They haven't taken 3rd dimensional form. And I talk about this in this upcoming book. There are spirit guides, there are guardian angels, there are beings on the other side that help the universe to run. However, the question becomes, when we talk about some of these stories, are these beings we're calling angels, are they 5th dimensional beings that are taking human form? Are they 4th dimensional beings that are coming into 3rd dimension? Or are they 3rd dimensional beings who have the capacity to fly and to perform extraordinary feats and who glow with light? And I think all of the above is true. And this is one of the reasons why I think it is very difficult for normal UFO researchers to understand, unless you have a spiritual component in your cosmology, to understand this bigger picture. So this is why they stick with the metallurgical samples, because it's 3rd dimensional and it's safe, and it's like the Romans, we can bite on it, all that. But this is why, when you have people who are on this bigger page of understanding the multidimensional nature of reality, you can begin to realize that there are beings, light beings. He can come down, coalesce a 3rd dimensional body or 3rd dimensional spaceship for a period of time, and then move off. The higher you go, the less you need technology. And at these higher levels, some of these spaceships actually have an organic component, a communication component, as well as a technological component. And you have to be in a deep state of mind in order to interface with this. In other words, the little chatty beta brain consciousness that we know of is not going to really allow you to run them. You have to know how to drop your brainwaves into alpha or theta in order to do so. Now, other people have called them giants, and you can see this is a picture from the National Museum in Athens, Greece. And you can just kind of get, if this old guy was standing up here, he'd probably come up to Zeus's waist. So, obviously, about twice as tall as us. Perhaps in another age, we may have even called them gods. And, that's what the ancients called them for a long time. They called them gods. And then it got moved over at some to the good god, the good gods and the bad gods, depending on what political side you're on. Then it became the God Most High, that would have been Zeus or Ninurta or Enlil, his father. And then it became anybody that wasn't on his side became an angel, that was on his side that wasn't going to be called a god. He became a singular god with a big G, and all the others became angels that were supporting him on his throne, and the ones that were against him became, demons. And so this is where it's just so tricky, because all this has been twisted, and because we lost so much with the burning of our history, with the burning of the Library of Alexandria, and by the Christians and by the Arabs, we're really having to do diligence. We're having to really reconstruct our history. It's kind of like we got a historical lobotomy, so no wonder it's confusing. Some, especially in the UFO world today, like David Icke, for example, he was initially, he's a reporter. I'm sure he's a good reporter and charismatic guy, and has done some good reporting history. However, he wasn't a mystic. He didn't have encounters, and he just immediately jumped to the fact that the Anunnaki must be reptilians. Well, they're not reptilians. Every picture you see, they're humans. Okay, humans with wings sometimes, and humans without. But unfortunately, he misled a lot of people with the fear agenda. That's not to say that there aren't reptilians among many other humanoid races. That's not to say that there's not a fear agenda and a shadow government. That's true too, but let's not confuse one with the other. And I think that's just really critical. I'd say 90% of the extraterrestrials are very good, very benevolent, and want only what's best for us. 10% are, the bad apple, as with anything, and they have their own self-serving agenda. It's unfortunate that I think the U.S. government has gone into business with the bad apples instead of the good apples, and that's something that has allowed them to, develop technology, have black budgets, and keep everything secret, and kill people in the name of, power, basically. And most of the people who are running this country today don't really even know what to do about them. They're not on the inside of this cabal, they're on the outside as well. So that's the whole shadow government piece. So, when they call them oppressors, it's very easy for the shadow government to make someone else the enemy, because they don't want us looking at them as the enemy. They want to be the one that, using fear, power, and control, like 9/11, suddenly, we all are willing to lay down all of our human rights because protect us against the big bad aliens. And this is why in Hollywood, all these big movies, and there's some great movies out there. Independence Day is wonderful, but every single one of them show the aliens as being the invaders. And except for Steven Spielberg's, great alien movie, the E.T., that kind of got under the radar, thank goodness. I think they're going to be releasing that. And then you've got Paul, the little gray alien smoking the doobie out in the woods. That was a silly, ridiculous movie. But you don't have any movies that are really talking about what's really, really going on, which is positive, benevolent beings who want to help us, and our own shadow controllers are trying to prevent that from happening. And so it's really important for us to be discerning, I think, when we are investigating all of this. I think we have to really keep an open mind, look at the evidence, and stay open to the possibility that something wonderful could happen, but the darkness that's being projected onto the ETs is our own darkness. It's the darkness of the manipulators who are themselves dark, who want us to fear the others for fear that we will wake up within the dream that they've created. So when we look back, we can see clear evidence that there are plenty of human ETs. They look just like us, more or less, with small differences. They were clearly teachers for humanity. They set up the great mystery schools. They were civilization makers. This is a beautiful statue in New York City, just absolutely incredible, of Hermes or Thoth or Mercury. And again, you see the caduceus here, one of the symbols within the great mystery school of spiritual enlightenment and awakening. Now, there are many names for them. The Hebrews called them the Anakim. We call them the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Nephilim, the Igigi, and the Grigori. And there's slight differences. The Watchers, we can say that the Watchers are beings that were actually on Mars waiting for the gold shipments, and they were watching for the gold shipments. And eventually they did come to the Earth when Mars conditions became so terrible they couldn't stay there. And some of them took human wives, and, basically their children then grew up and started doing whatever they wanted, and their children were giants. And those then were censored or censured by Enlil, and those became what we think of as the Nephilim, and then the Igigi. Some would say they're the same, or the Igigi or Grigori are supposedly the half-human demigods, basically. And so, again, like any person that has a total power, unless you're very enlightened, you can misuse your power. So we want to ask, who were those gods and where did they come from? Now, depending on how much time we have, I'll be talking more about them here, but they did come, the Anunnaki at least, came from a planet called Nibiru, which in Akkadian, it means a fort or a ferry or a place of transition, because it was the planet of the crossing. So here's the symbol for the sun, the circle with the earth, with the dot at the center. Here's the ecliptic, the flat horizon. Here's our north and south pole, the four directions, and they came from the South Pole. They always approach from Antarctica. That's when the first time we would see them. And so it was the planet of the crossing. And it's because the planet Nibiru crossed between two suns or two solar systems. We've discovered that 85% of all the stars out there are a double sun. So are we a double sun or a single? Well, we've all thought we were a single, but in fact, the ancient records tell us that we have a brown dwarf that is a pulsar. A pulsar is a sun that got so hot it then kind of collapsed on itself. And so supposedly this has 5 planets, and one of the planets winds up crossing between the two suns. So their sun is called Solaris, where our sun is called Sol. So the planet of the crossing, so they come in periodically around every 3,600 years, at least according to the way that Zachariah Sitchin translated the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. And so they don't just go around quite on the same flat plate, they're at an angle, they're at a crossed angle, which is why the planet of the crossing. This is a plate by Zachariah Sitchin, the late great Zachariah Sitchin. I knew him. He was a colleague of mine and Williams and others that have been in this field for a long time. He was a profound researcher, a Jewish scholar, and one of about 10,000 people on the planet that could read Sumerian cuneiform. He wrote a 10-book series called the Earth Chronicle series. I think it started coming out in 75 or 76, but really, really important information, because he was able to translate these texts in light of current inventions. If we tried to translate these 100 years ago, we wouldn't understand things like rocket ship, missile, airplane, flying machine. We just wouldn't even understand what that meant, because we didn't have those things in our cultural data banks. They didn't exist. So it's only been during the 20th century that we became advanced enough that we could begin to understand what the Sumerian texts were even saying to us. This is the sun, and here are the different planets around the sun: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Did I count that one? I don't think so. 11. So 11. So he has a book called The 12th Planet, talking about the fact that we're the 12th planet. And of course, I think that also includes the moon. So these are some of his books. And you can get them used. You can get them in paperback. You can get on Amazon. They're really interesting. But if you had only one to read, I would recommend the Book of Enki. So this story begins about 438,000 years ago in what's called the Zeb Tepe, or the first time. Okay, and this is a time basically that is discovered and discussed in these Sumerian cuneiform clay tablets. And thank goodness that they did it this way, because parchment and paper, as we know, burns and it deteriorates over time and can get mold and fall apart. But clay and stone is more lasting and more durable. They settled an area. They first came to Earth and settled this area in the Mesopotamian Valley. Their very first city was called Eridu, which means home far away. And they settled in what was called the Fertile Crescent, which is at the intersection of four great rivers: the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Pishon, and I can't ever remember the fourth one, but three of them are still active today, and the fourth one is dried up. But it was right on the Persian Gulf, okay? And this whole area was not sand as it is today. This is where, Iran and Iraq are today, which is mostly desert. And that's because of the conflict that happened around 2150 BC, where this whole area kind of got bombed or nuked, and radiation destroyed and spoiled the land. But for thousands and thousands of years, this was a gorgeous, gorgeous Fertile Crescent area. And we can see that Assyria grew up here, in Nineveh, the city of Nineveh. The Babylon grew up in this area. Sumer grew up in this area. And then we see it's close to what we think of the Holy Land today, Cana and Jerusalem. This is where Egypt would have been. So when they left this area and crossed over, the Hebrews, the Red Sea, they would have wandered around in the desert. If 40 years was actually accurate, or not just a literary adage, they would have wandered on here. And then, if you remember, in the Old Testament, the Hebrews were told to go kill every man, woman, chicken, pig, and goat, and rape all the virgins. And this was, supposed to be lawful activity. Well, I don't really think that they did that. As I talk about in my Sophia book, there's a lot of evidence that they created about 40 peaceful settlements, hillside settlements. And we know they were Jewish because they didn't have any pig bones. And so we know that pigs were outlawed to eat. And in my research on these books, I discovered that a lot of the songs, some of the things in the Old Testament book of Psalms that's attributed to David, a lot of the customs were actually Canaanite customs. And the Canaanites honored the Divine Mother and the Divine Father. And of course, it's quite possible that there were some battles, like the Battle of Jericho, we hear with the horn where the walls fell down. But I think that a lot of the horrible things we read about in the Old Testament, where the Hebrews were told to be such horrible aggressors and murderers, it's quite possible that that was actually created later to give a sense of strength and national identity, like don't mess with us, to the Hebrews. Of course, there were battles where the Hebrews were conquered by Persia, the Upper Kingdom, around I think 722 BC, and then the Lower Kingdom, Judea, actually fell around I think around 570 or something, to the Babylonians. And so there definitely were some wars that were going on in this area. But this is, of course, where Jerusalem is today, and the holy cities and all those, the infighting's going on over there, which really seems so crazy since there's lots of land on the earth, but it's because this land was being fought over by these different tribes so long ago that it's almost like the ley lines are twisted in this area, and it's generations of killing and killing and killing and a lack of forgiveness. And it's just really sad because this was probably one of the cradles of civilization on our planet. We see the Hittite empires up here, so it kind of gives you an idea of how it all was. So these Sumerian clay tablets were discovered in the city of Nineveh, which we just saw was actually up here, around 1820, something like that. And they basically, we found over 100,000 of them, but there were 22,000 that were found in the temple enclosures that were talking about the history of the gods and the history before the flood and even after the flood. So we know that this area became repopulated after the Great Flood, which took place about probably 12,000 years ago, 11,500, 600 years ago. You know, so much of the earth was wiped clean. It was destroyed. We had to start over. So we know these first settlements and begin in this area again around 6,000 BC. That's about 8,000 years ago. In the second and third millennium BC, Nineveh became a religious center devoted to Ishtar and to other gods. In 1820, Nineveh was mapped by British archaeologist Claudius Rich, but it was not until 1847 that the palace of Sennacherib was discovered, when the young British adventurer Austen Henry Layard unearthed the great palace of King Sennacherib, along with a library of over 22,000 cuneiform documents. So this is a picture of King Sennacherib. Totally looks human, you know, doesn't really look taller than, well, maybe he's a little taller. Yep, I'd say he's a little taller. So you can see the shoulders here and the shoulders here. So maybe if these guys are, I'm just making this up, 6 foot, maybe he's, you know, a foot and a half, 2 feet, maybe he's an 8-footer or something like that. This is a picture of the palace that they discovered, quite incredible. And again, we've got these huge winged, bearded dudes that definitely come out of the Sumerian culture. But then we've got winged guys and the tree of life over here. There's a lot to be said about it. The palace's interior walls were paneled with huge stone slabs carved in relief with images of King Sennacherib's victories. Here one could see the king and the army, foreign landscapes, conquered enemy cities, including a remarkably accurate depiction of the Judean city of Lachish, whose destruction by the Assyrians was recorded in Second Kings. And so so there definitely were some wars going on at that time. Inscribed in cuneiform on the colossal sculptures in the doorway of his throne room was King Sennacherib's own account of his siege of Jerusalem. It differed from the biblical account, some details, but confirmed that Sennacherib did not capture the city. So look again at the size here in the drawing of a human. He'd come up to like the first knuckle on these big dudes, okay? They're pretty large. This find generated a great deal of excitement because amidst the increasing religious doubts and scriptural revisionism of the mid-19th century, that would be, you know, mid-1800s, it gave Christian fundamentalists an independent corroboration of a biblical event. And, you know, we've been searching for them ever since. Written in the doorway of the very room where King Sennacherib may have issued his order to attack. And you can see that the Assyrians and the Hittites and the Sumerians and Babylonians, all these guys are carrying the shin. They're carrying the implements that they then learned from the gods, the Sumerian gods. So this is a little bit of a timeline. Around 705 BC, King Sennacherib established Nineveh as the capital of the Assyrian Empire. Large-scale construction work begins, including building the largest palace of its time, which was 42,000 kilometers large. I mean, that is just like, what the heck? With at least 80 rooms, that's gigantic. In 650 BC, under King Ashurbanipal, and I like Ashurbanipal, and you'll see why, because he was probably the first, you know, archaeologist. A new palace is constructed together with a large library, and it's in large part because of Urshabanipal that we have these records today. Sumerian cuneiform texts found in the library palace tell the story of the Anunnaki gods and of their planet Nibiru, and you can see how cool the writing looks here. Of course, we can't read it, but this is probably one of the first writings on the whole planet. And there are people who've compared this to things in Tibetan and in the Nakul language of Lemuria, and that has been found in Mexico and Central America. So pretty interesting. So one of we have some really great books. The Enamad Elish is one, and the Atrahasis is one. The Enamad Elish is the Babylonian epic of creation, and here we see, part of the text of it, 7 tablets of the history of creation, and these were read every new year, actually on January the 6th, which we, in Christianity, we conscripted that to make it the day of the Epiphany where the Magi went to visit Jesus. But it was originally a holy day where they read this story for thousands of years about the coming of the gods and how the gods kind of seeded the earth and so forth. And it lays out this whole thing that it looks like a celestial struggle, or a struggle between a celestial god and a celestial monster. So it tells of a great collision between the planets Nibiru and Tiamat, and that's where the asteroid belt was long ago. And according to them, it goes back 510 million years ago. And this tore apart the planet Tiamat, basically creating the asteroid belt, which was called the hammered bracelet in a lot of the ancient literature, and also created Phobos, which is a very beaten up little moon of Mars, and the Earth. So it spun the core of Tiamat out according to these texts, okay, as wild as this might sound to people, and that ultimately became, it moved inside of Tiamat's orbit to take on the orbit that became the Earth. So astronomer Alessandro Morbidelli, of France's observatory in France, the Côte d'Azur, says there was a celestial collision involving a supplemental planet, that would be Tiamat, that had existed where the asteroid belt is now. He believes it happened about 3.9 billion years ago, so he places it much further back, and that these events explain the unusual long elliptical orbit of the phantom planet. So I want you to get that this is an astronomer, a mainstream astronomer, speaking about the fact that there is a phantom planet that is going in this elliptical space, and that that it exists, and that there was a planet where the asteroid belt is, which does not take a brain scientist to figure out. The Sumerians wrote of an advanced civilization on a planet named Nibiru that had been in a different solar system than Earth, and it circled around the pulsar called Solaris. So this is, this isn't made up. This is all stuff that literally was passed down through thousands of years by the gods of their history that we have recorded going back 8,000 years in our history, that we only discovered in the early 1800s, and we only kind of got translated in the last 100 years. So that's what this is about. This pulsar was a star before it collapsed and was the sun around which Nibiru had once orbited. The celestial lords also told the Sumerians that water could be found on Neptune, Uranus, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Jupiter's moons, and the rings of Saturn, as well as on asteroids and comets as well. And this is all something that is now confirmed by NASA. The Sumerians, lacking telescopes, could only get such a concept from those whose astronomical knowledge far exceeded their own. Today, our astronomers have confirmed all these things. The Sumerian creation epic lends compelling evidence for the extraterrestrial settlement of Earth by human astronauts who came to be regarded as the ancient gods of planet Earth. So the word Anunnaki literally means those who from the heavens came. And I love this graphic. I think it's so wonderful with the heavens behind and the tree of life. And you've got winged Anunnaki and non-winged Anunnaki with this flying disc or ship with, whether it's solar panels or just symbolic, we don't know. So this is the fairy planet, of course, and it was because it ferried between that sun and this sun. And of course, later they became known as the fairies, didn't they? But we spell the fairies different, F-A-I-R-E-S. So because it ferries between the inner and the outer solar system. So This is a symbol that's found around the world, and I'm going to show it to you now in its various forms. And so it doesn't always look exactly like this, but pretty close. This is, for example, a derivative of it, and you can see the 8-pointed star with the 9th in the middle. The 9th are the Aeneid, of course, and here it is in the crossing of St. Peter's Square. This is clearly not a square, guys. It's a circle, and here's the sun in the middle, and this is where the obelisk is that we're so familiar with. We've got the 4 directions here, and then we've got the cross, the earth cross, that is Nibiru, and we can see it very clearly here at the Vatican. So, of course, the Vatican knew all this stuff, you know. This was taught within the mystery schools. Everybody knew this stuff. But then what happened once the God Most High became God with a big G, they set out to basically murder anybody that had this knowledge and to conscript it for their own, so that most people don't know why in the world they built this the way they built it. We also see it here. Planet X, you're talking about the planet of the crossing, and we see it in this tarot card where we're talking about the Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune has to do with the cycles of time and how periodically this planet comes back, and sometimes it really brings wisdom or knowledge. This would be the Sphinx here because they are teachers of mankind. You can see it's the 10 card of all things, and sometimes, of course, you know, it brings asteroids and comets and meteors and all sorts of things that create chaos, and and it comes specifically during 4 ages. These are the 4 fixed ages: Aquarius the man, Taurus the bull, Leo the lion, and Scorpio the eagle, the high end. And you see there's a book of knowledge in every one, because when the gods have returned, every time there seems to be an upgrade to humanity in terms of knowledge or culture or wisdom or science or the arts. And here's the Vatican symbol. Very clearly, they call it the Chi Rho, but this is clearly, you know, we're talking about the same conversation. And these are you also see it in Egypt. These are the 3 tassels. You'll see it in the Egyptian, okay, where the 3 tassels come off of the crook and the flail, okay? And this was the symbol of the pharaoh. So the winged planet, we also identify this symbol. We see it on so many things in the world, Bentleys and, you know, Aston Martins and all sorts of secular use, commercial use. It comes right out of this whole idea of the winged planet, the planet that's traveling through space. And so here Chrysler's used it, Steak and Shake's used it, Mini has used it. This is how it's been secularized by the powers that be, people who actually know about this stuff, who are part of that cabal, and maybe some of them are enlightened beings, and some of them are, you know, dastardly beings that are manipulating like puppet masters behind the scenes. But we can recognize clearly this logo in these symbols. And what's so interesting is when we look at this NASA footage, this is what you're looking at is the sun that's been covered up, okay, so that we can see the solar rays or the solar mass ejections coming off of the sun, the solar coronals. But it's normally just like this, a background of stars. However, you know, you can sort of see in these images, there looks like gigantic ships that look like flying, you know, winged beings being recorded by the Soho Observatory. And here again we see close up of this, and these are gigantic cylindrical motherships. So imagine how large these darn things are. This is just absolutely incredible. I mean, if you've ever seen a picture of Venus passing in front of the sun, it looks like a teeny weeny little dot. So these are enormous. I mean, you know, I don't know what they are. I mean, hundreds of miles, but this is pretty interesting. And of course, it looks very much like our winged symbol, doesn't it? They came here in what were called the boat of a million years. In other words, enormous vessels that were made to last for a really, really long period of time. And as I said, 3,600 of our Earth years equals one of theirs, because a year is the amount of time it takes for your planet to orbit around the sun. Obviously, theirs takes a lot longer than ours. So I occasionally, about every 3,600 years, it's also quite possible that as, you know, a planet X comes through the Milky Way or through our solar system, that sometimes the red dwarf also may come with it, because, you know, are they just going in a circle like this at a constant distance, or is in fact the red dwarf coming closer to us, the pulsar? So, and it can bring comets. And of course, in the ancient world, comets were always seen as harbingers of doom, because they brought meteors with them, and probably because they had to move through the asteroid belt where there are a lot of meteors, so they picked up a lot of meteors with their gravitational field. So this is at the heart of a hypothesis attempting to explain the periodic mass extinctions which punctuate the history of life on Earth. So in other words, sometimes we get hit by these bombardment of meteors that like took out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So in 2003, an astounding discovery was announced in France in the pages of the prestigious monthly magazine called Science and Life. It published an update on the planetary makeup of our solar system in light of recent discoveries in the Kuiper Belt, entitled Planets, How Many Are There in Our Solar System? So this is an astronomer, Dr. Valerie Jeffos, who probably put her career totally on the line, made a sensational announcement. There is one more unknown planet in our solar system, a phantom planet whose possible orbit is too elongated to be seen. I expect that one day we will discover a new Mars-sized planet. Dr. Jeffos told the journal with certainty, a planet whose orbital period is several thousand years. He provided the journal with a sketch of the planet's elongated elliptical orbit, even indicated in the sketch where the phantom planet probably is now. And you can see this is all in French, a planet with the original eclipse, a supplemental planet with the trajectory of trace ecliptique, don't know, that exists with the astronomers, and it repeats, comes back periodically into our orbit. So, so it travels through Orion, which of course we know Orion was very precious in the star alignments to the ancients. Lots of pyramids and things are aligned with Orion, which represented Osiris to them. This is Betelgeuse here. This is Rigel, the blue star Rigel. Here's the 3 stars of the belt of Orion. The Galactic Council, the center of the Galactic Council, said to be in the double star in the middle of the dagger here, and then it moved through the heart of Leo, which is Regulus. In other words, it wasn't actually out there in space, but from our point of view, from our perspective on Earth, it appeared to move through Leo the lion, the heart of the lion, and through Orion. And both of these are very important symbolic constellations. This is an article from 1983 in the Washington Post. They discovered a planet possibly as large as Jupiter. So it's a gigantic planet, a heavenly body possibly as large as the planet Jupiter and possibly so close to Earth it could be part of this solar system, has been found in the direction of the constellation Orion by an orbiting telescope aboard the U.S. infrared astronomical satellite. So mysterious is the object that astronomers do not know if it's a planet, a giant comet, a nearby protostar that never got hot enough to become a star, a distant galaxy so young that it's still in the process of forming its first stars, or a galaxy so shrouded in dust that none of the light cast by stars ever gets through. All I can tell you is that we don't know what it is, said, that's vague enough, Dr. Jerry Newton-Bogger, IRAS Chief Scientist for California's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and Director of the Palomar Observatory in the California Institute of Technology. The most fascinating explanation is this mysterious body, which is so cold it casts no light and has never been seen by optical telescopes on Earth, is that it's a giant gaseous planet as large as Jupiter and as close to the sun as 50 million miles. While they may seem to be a great distance in earthbound terms, it's a stone's throw in cosmological terms, so close in fact that it could be its nearest heavenly body to Earth is the nearest one beyond the outermost planet Pluto. If that's really that close, it would be a part of our solar system, he said. So this is 83. So if you notice, things have kind of gone silent since then. And I want to give you a comparison of size here. This is Mercury, Venus, and Earth. We can sort of see are the inner planets. Here's the moon. This is Mars in comparison. Look how large Jupiter is. So if Nibiru is as large as Jupiter, No wonder it's a giant. I mean, it's huge. Even if it was as large as Saturn, you can put three, I think it's either 300 or 600 Earths in Saturn itself. And then this is, of course, Uranus and Neptune. Here's Pluto. And so in this drawing, they've got Nibiru the size of about Saturn without the rings. But if it's really the size of Jupiter, that's pretty darn large. Again, this is the comparison here. Here's our sun. This is probably a low mass star, the size of that. So maybe Solaris is this size, maybe Solaris is this size. Here's Jupiter by comparison, and here's Earth. So, you know, again, pretty large. No wonder the beings are larger than we are. This is another picture here. Nibiru in this picture is, you know, pretty big. It's about the size of Jupiter. And then the dark star. So this is actually from Google Sky, and it appears to be, you know, either we have planets around a dark star, or we have Nibiru with at least 4 satellites around it. Okay, we began tracking Nibiru in 1983, and a lot of people didn't think Nibiru was here, but I think that it is, and I'll show you some evidence for that. Google was told to deliberately black out where it was coming from, and so you would literally go on Google and find these big black things to not show us where it was. And this was all approaching, you know, this is 2000. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, coming up to 2012. So from 2007, it could be seen from Antarctica, which is why the largest telescope observatory in the world is down in Antarctica at Norimea Station. This is it being seen next to the sun at dawn from Australia in 2009. You can see it rising with the sun. Once the sun comes fully up, it's hard to see it, but at sunrise and sunset, you can see it. Here it's obviously on the far side of the sun. It's not close. This is Russia 2009. This is Russia 2009. Again, you get a sense of the size of it. This is southern Russia coming up or going down in sunset. Here it is. I can't tell you where this is, but you can see they're a little more even. Here we are again. Now some could say this is a sundog. Maybe it is, but the sun appears to be over here. This appears to be something else altogether. See how the light is coming from here? See, it's lighter over here. The sun's over here. This is something else. This is Croatia, 2011. Absolutely incredible. Now remember, they covered it totally in gold. It has a gold shielding on it. So of course it's reflecting the sun's rays. So although there may be internal heat within the planet, I don't doubt that, the reason it's so bright, it looks like a second sun, is because of this. Is it as large as the sun? No, but it's all about distance. Just like our moon and the sun are not the same, but when we have that solar eclipse, they appear to look like they're the same size. Here we have again. Here we have Palo Alto, California. Incredible. This is China, 2011. Hope you guys are enjoying this. I remember when I first found these images, they were so incredible. This is Devon, England, and I actually, you know, was speaking at these conferences in 2008, 9, and 10, 11, and I was saying, look, Nibiru it's here, it's approaching, and I was on panels where like, oh, no, it's not coming for another 160 years. I'm like, do the research, dude, you know, you can see it. This is incredible. Southwestern England, extraordinary. So totally covered in gold now and reflective, gold from our planet, but save their planet. Proposed path of Nibiru. So there were people like myself that were trying to work out this proposed path and when it would come and if it had anything to do with 2012 and if we were going to have some kind of, you know, difficulties. And of course, depending on where our planet is, if we're over here when it comes around, not a lot of difficulties. If we're, and of course, that would be the case. If we're here and we're looking at the sun rising, Nibiru would have to be back behind the sun, right? Okay, that's how it would have to have gone. So, what if, you know, we were over here? when it came by. Amazing. That could really create a lot more problems for us. And so, there's a lot of us that have been trying to work this out. And of course, it would really help if the astronomers and people that really have this equipment and the capacity to look at it could address it with us. And they had their own names for the different planets. You can sort of see they called Earth Ki, Ki. So these comets were linked to periodic destructions and floods and like destruction of Atlantis. And so a lot of people in the ancient world were very scared when these came because they looked at them as harbingers of doom. So let's look at some of the evidence that there were astronauts that were coming here from the planet. Certainly this is one of the Anunnaki. You can see him wearing a cross. It looks like a Celtic cross. So it certainly predates Christianity by tens of thousands of years. You've got the winged disc here. He appears to be in some kind of elevator or conveyor, chamber, and he's pushing some kind of a button, as we would today. The guys wore earrings, by the way. I thought that was kind of interesting. Definitely must have been colder on their planet because they came here with long beards, and after they were here for a while, they shaved them off. This would be Inanna. She's a female astronaut. She's got goggles on, okay, and all sorts of kind of buttons and things like that going on with her uniform. So here are some depictions from the ancient world. Here's a modern astronaut, and these are all ancient astronauts that they have found in various cultures from South America, Central America, and so forth. Here is a modern astronaut with a big old head. Here is an old one, with a UFO in the background on rock. Here's a modern astronaut. Here is a depiction from the Mayan civilization, a totally human. These are not shape-shifting reptilians, they're humans. And then they probably some of them had these big old heads. This is where we get the cone heads, Saturday Night Live, the cone heads. And this is really probably why the wizards wore those hats, is because the wizards were probably combinations between humans and Anunnaki. They were very long-lived next to humans. They were taller, like Gandalf. They were more intelligent. They had more capacity to the brain, and they used those cone-shaped hats, which, later the Catholic Church turned them into dunce hats, but they were originally hats that connotated wisdom. That's what the wizard hat was about. Here we have modern space shuttles. Here we have ancient airplanes. This is from Bogota, Colombia, in South America. There are many of these that have been found. Here we have what appears to be some kind of cylindrical craft with 3 clear beings inside with either, wings or rudders or whatever this is. Here we have the Tree of Life, the Sumerian gods. This appears to be a god that maybe it's a god that has on a wetsuit, a rubber suit. It's looks like a fish. So could they shapeshift into mer people? Maybe they just have wetsuits on. We don't know. We're having to figure it out. Again, the same kind of things. Maybe these were the Dogon. The Dogon tribe talks about the fact that beings from the Sirius B system came who could actually go into the water at night and come back. So maybe the Syrians were working with the Anunnaki. Very clearly here, this is great with landing struts. You can really see he's holding the Shin. This is in Persia, okay, Darius's tomb or grave. This is a Hura Mazda, that's who that is, okay. Here we have the space shuttle today, and here we have this incredible, and of course we've seen these 4 moons. If it's Nibiru, it's interesting. It's like the 4 moons that would surround Nibiru. So, you can see where some of our iconography comes from. These are very ancient symbols that have multiple levels of meaning. It's not to discount the current meanings that we've attributed to them, like the cross that Jesus was on, but it's to say that this is like stacked like an echo through time with so many levels of meaning. Here we have what appears to be a beam beaming this dude up to the ship. Okay, I mean, there's like some kind of energy balls and the guy is literally floating in the air as he's going up to the spaceship. Okay, so you can see again how tall they were next to us. The gods created what they call the black-headed ones. In other words, they took a more primitive form of humanity down here. Java man, Cro-Magnon man, Neanderthal man, and they jump-started our DNA. They brought us up to Homo sapiens, and then eventually Homo sapiens sapiens. And we think Homo sapiens go back at least 200, if not 300,000 years, and that Homo sapiens sapiens at least 40 to 60,000 years, and maybe, as William was saying, 75,000 years. They're larger than us, and this is Demeter and Persephone, and this is a grown human man. So, if he's 6 feet, she's going to be at least 8 feet, something like that. You can see here, we thought they had big egos, but what if, in fact, they were this big and we were this little? So if we're 6 foot, this guy's got to be, I don't know, 15 feet. He's really tall. Again, we can see the Anunnaki here in a prayerful position. And these are not children, because these little guys that were probably the humans have beards, and they're dressing pretty much like the big dudes, okay? So these are human beings that are copying the gods in dress. And look how much bigger the gods were. That's pretty incredible. So same kind of thing here. Same kind of thing here. You can see this is a priest of Naram Singh. This is the priest. This is Naram Singh, it's a king who was probably half Anunnaki and half human. Here, these are Greek friezes of the gods. These are the gods here. These are the humans here. Look at the difference in size. They're at least, if she's, let's say, just for sake of argument, she's 6 feet. She might be 5.5, but then that's going to make this guy twice as tall. So, 10, 11, 12 feet. She's going to be, I don't know, 15 feet. Here we see it again. We see the gods and we see the humans. And this is a regular size hog or pig. That's, commensurate in scale with how it would be today. So they were quite a bit larger than us. And of course, their planet's larger, so that makes sense. And so we are starting to find some of their bones today, and I've given whole presentations. There's a great one that I've done for Neil on giants and elves and fairies, where I just show sample after sample after sample of these large bones and where they've been found around the world. Here's a femur bone that the beam would have to be at least 14 to 16 feet tall, at least. So that's a large bone. Here are some of the footprints from some of these beings. And there's a lot to be said about them, but you can see the difference in the size of their skull and the size of our skull. We could fit about 6 of our skulls into this skull. This guy's bent over. This is a skull. You can literally see this skull is so big, it's his whole body. So, these stories about giants, a lot of these things we think of as myth, they're really all true today. Here's the giant skull found in Scotland. And of course, there have been all these These are stored in Nevada. Some of them, these guys were probably half-breeds. They were the, what we call the demigods. They were a combination. 8 foot tall with 6 fingers and toes, double rows of teeth, and no incisors. And a lot of them were fair-haired, red-headed. The Anunnaki gods were definitely, a lot of them were blonde and red hair. Again, maybe because they didn't have the intense sun that we have today, so they didn't need the pigment in their skin or the dark eyes and dark hair. These are some of the early ones. When they came down, they had these incredibly large craniums, and this is of course Peru. And here we have Akhenaten's kids, his daughters, and of course Akhenaten, the heretic king who taught monotheism, was among them. This is an artist depiction of probably what they look like, very beautiful, but with these increased skulls. And this is one of the reasons they wore the headdresses, probably to protect and hold those skulls in place. This is a red-headed giant found in the Americas. So these would again been, we have all this religious connotation to calling them Ijichi or Nephilim. let's just say these are descendants of humans and the gods together. And Cortez and De Soto and a lot of the early explorers in America, in the Americas, found whole tribes of these, 8, 9, 10-foot beings, and they were very peaceful. They weren't making war on anybody. In fact, we were the ones making war. Here's a whole skeleton with, again, the elongated head. And here we have it in Egypt. So clearly by this time, this skull is smaller than this skull. So over time, as they interbred with humans, or they did not, they grew up on our planet, they didn't have to have as long a heads. And this has to do with the gamma rays that are produced by their planet. There's a low level of gamma rays produced there, which tends to expand the cranium. So if they were raised on their planet, they had the larger heads. If they were raised down here, they had more the smaller heads. In 1846, Joseph Henry, first secretary of the Smithsonian Institute, estimates that there were over 10,000 burial mounds in Ohio alone. That's a lot. 10,000 burial mounds in one state. 10,000, that's huge. In 1972, a mound was uncovered by the Historical Collection of Noble County, Ohio, with the remains of 3 skeletons whose size would indicate they measured at least 8 feet in height. The remains had double teeth in the front as well as in the back of the mouth and in both the upper and lower jaws. Now, why would they want double teeth? Because nature takes care of its own. If you live 100,000 years, you better, have 2 sets of teeth. Otherwise, what's going to happen? Think of us. We live 80 years and we lose our teeth. So, if you're going to live 100,000 years or 20,000 years or 10,000 years or 5,000 years, you better have your teeth. Upon exposure to the atmosphere, the skeletons crumbled. So were they winged beings? That is a very good question. And I don't have the answer, but I want to just show you the painter's evidence in the past. So this is Greek. This is a Greek urn. And, clearly these are human beings that have wings. This is the Christian and Jewish lore. They were turned into angels. But if we go back before whatever, twist happened in the field with the Jews and the Christians and the patriarchal religions, to where a lot of this got reinterpreted in a different way, we can see back to the original sources. Here is a god that has 4 wings, which would be logical to be able to fly. Here's one that has 2 wings. Here are amalgamation beings. This being looks like a lion with a human head, but a pair of wings. This one looks like a griffin. So it's a hawk or an eagle with a lion's body and eagle's wings. Here are early pictures. This is Ninhurta carrying one of his lightning bolts. He looks like he's correcting or chastising or fighting with or chasing this guy. And this little guy, again, lion claws, lion body, eagle's wings. Okay, and here we have the eagle-headed ones, human bodies with eagle's heads and wings. These have been found not only in Assyria and the Mediterranean, but believe it or not, in Ecuador. This is news. It was found in a collection called the Father Crespi collection. And this one is from Ecuador, and it really is identical to the ones we find over in the Mediterranean. Now here are the eagle-headed guys with their mouths open. Maybe he's complaining that the stone is too heavy that he's having to carry. Wah! Wah! Don't make me carry it. It weighs a ton. Okay, maybe that's what's happening here. And here we have the same kind of thing with their mouth open. We normally see them with their mouth closed. But these are beings that have, 4 wings. So maybe they really could fly. And then we have similar statues. This is the one with the bull body. And then, of course, we've seen the one with the eagle body with the human head. So were these creatures that were indigenous to their planet that they brought down here? I think that's probably the case. It's also possible because they were so good with genetics that they messed around with genetics. Unfortunately, we got into doing some of this in Atlantis, and really it was terrible. It was a bad thing. So it's quite possible that these beings are native to their planet. When the people went back from their planet, they took them back with them. So Again, we see this looks like a human being with some kind of a, I don't know, what a dog head or something. You can see the round ears, but we don't have these creatures on the planet today. So were these part of the experiments from the Edgar Cayce talks about in Atlantis, where we began, we meaning humans and extraterrestrials, mixing the DNA of animals and humans, which is really like the GMOs we're creating in our food today. It's a violation of spiritual law. It really is. It abuses the animal kingdom, and then we make these people our servants. And this is what happened in Atlantis, and was one of the reasons why Atlantis kind of wound up having to be taken down. This is a creature we don't have in our world today, but it appears to be a Set kind of animal. A Set was a god, sort of a fire, destruction, and death. He was an egotistic maniac, murderer dude in Egypt who fought Horus. He took control of Egypt for about 350 years, and Horus had to fight him and defeat him. And his anthro his zoomorphic form is a creature that's kind of like this, a Set animal that we don't really know what it is today. But you can see this looks like amalgamation between a lion here, an eagle, claws here, I don't know, a serpent head here. I mean, very strange. Very strange. Here's another one. Here's a bull body and a human torso. So were satyrs and fawns real? Yeah, I think that they really were real. I think that all these things in mythology come out of something that was real. Centaurs and mermaids, yeah. This actually at the university is in Tucson. It's at an art museum. Now, is it one that they found and constructed and they didn't go too public with it so that the powers that be wouldn't come in and take it out? This is extraordinary. This is how the bones of a centaur would have looked. Mermaids, many of you may be aware that there's some very interesting stuff on the internet today with finding bodies that seem to be aquatic on the bottom. And there are certainly evidence archaeologically that our ancestors knew about these beings, a form of human that lives in the ocean, that can breathe underwater. This is a sandstone cave in Little Karoo Mountains in Egypt that shows mermaids. And here we have them, they're fishing with their poles or their spears or so forth. Now there's a dragon, a two-horned dragon fossil. I promised I'd show you this. This is found in China in 1996. It's measuring 7.6 meters long. Well, a meter is about 3 feet, so that's about 21 feet, something like that. Its head is 76 centimeters long. The neck is 54 centimeters long. The body is 2.7 meters in length. So that's 3 meters. That's 9 feet. Roughly, and it is 68 centimeters in width, and the tail is 3.7 meters long. So if we think of a meter as 3 feet, that's an easy way to do it. The tail is 12 feet. So the torso was 9 feet, and the tail is 12 feet. So, you know, and there are actually videos out there of flying dragons now. So I think it's possible that some of these things that have been dormant or asleep or suppressed or hidden, you know, they're back in our world today because we're moving into this higher vibration. So then there's the story of the Anunnaki gods having to fight the Titans. So in other words, there weren't just like these 12-footers, you know, the 8-footers, which are the amalgamation, the 12 and the 14 and the 15 and 16, the Anunnaki, but there were all these gigantic, maybe 30 to 50 foot tall. This is a tractor trailer. And this guy looks like he's got a gun. Pretty wild. And here they've taken the gun. Of course, the powers that be, you know, they came in here and did as much as they could to cover it up. So the skull alone is 5 to 6 feet tall. That's really large. And then this one was found in the Saudi Arabian desert. There's also been some found in India that are this large. So there are many different humans throughout the cosmos. We're a 6-footer. Osiris was said to be about 15 feet. But clearly, there's some that go up very, very tall, depending on the size of the planet. But the humanoid shape is the classic shape that everyone's made in. Some people have 3 fingers, some 4, some 5, some 6. Some have webbed toes or feet. Some are taller, some are shorter. Some can breathe underwater, some can't breathe underwater. Now, with Egypt, we have just assumed all this time that the pharaohs and the people who built these things just, had the big egos. They had the big head, and they wanted their monuments to be impressive. But is it possible that there are actually beings that are this tall, a 50-foot tall being? And then, here's the Horus, a 15-foot tall being. So it appears that they created a worldwide civilization on this planet for a long time before the Great Flood ever happened. And we're just in the process now of discovering it. And I did an incredible presentation on Atlantis, which is archived on Portal to Ascension. And I actually speak on this, which shows the evidence for many of these places that are being found all over the world. I'm just going to touch very, very briefly on some of this now. So these earlier civilizations were different ages of mankind during the time that Lemuria was up in the Pacific and the time that Atlantis was up in the Atlantic Ocean. And so you can see here the tectonic plates in the Pacific and the remnants of the islands that exist now, Samoa, the Pitcairn Islands from Admiral Cook, or Captain Cook, the Hawaiian Islands. We've got Easter Island in here. Easter Island here's this is the Nazca Plain, and this is the Ring of Fire, where there's been so much earthquake activity over in the Philippines and in Japan, down into New Zealand where Christchurch was destroyed, Australia, and so forth. But this was the original area where Lemuria was, and you can kind of see some of this activity in here. And of course, it went down even before Atlantis went down. Atlantis and Lemuria were up at the same time for a long period of time together. And this is, of course, where we've been having these big earthquakes along the San Andreas Fault, and the Alaska and Chile is down here, where there was a big earthquake in the same area at the same time when Nibiru was passing. Remember, we had like a 9 point something, I think in Chile, and then we had them in Alaska, and we had the Christchurch. We had this whole area basically. So at one time this was up, or a lot of this was up, and then like Atlantis, it went down in successive sections. With Atlantis, we wound up having it throughout the entire Atlantic Ocean till around 51 or 2,000 years ago, and then it broke up into 5 gigantic continent islands, and then it went down to 3 islands around 28,000 years ago, and then finally around 22,000 years ago it went down to the one really large continent island that we think of in Plato's Legends of Atlantis. And we're finding, this is actually real photography, and I've got probably 50 of these in that presentation. But these are some of the ancient temples that we're finding now under the water with sonar and submersibles and some of our advanced technology. And when we go down, we actually find that they're entire cities. And you can see here from the sonar that this is a step pyramid. So they're being found in the waters around the Caribbean, around Bimini, around Cuba, on the western side of what was Atlantis, and we can also find them in Lake Titicaca. I've actually been to Lake Titicaca, and there's definitely an underwater city there. Under that lake, and of course they found seashells, and Lake Titicaca is pushed way up in the Andes, but what are seashells doing on the beach there? Because it was, this area was pushed up during one of the great geologic changes. Here we can see pyramids that have been completely covered over with fossils and sea shells and so forth that have encrusted them, but they're step pyramids, and these look like entire cities. I mean, it's just quite quite extraordinary. And of course, we found underwater pyramids, and I talk about all this in much more depth. The pyramids are very important because the pyramids were how they harnessed the energy of the earth. The earth is the largest source of energy available to us. It's a very powerful battery. It's got an iron core with a sun at the center. All living planets have a sun at the center. If the core of the planet has died, where there is no heat, then the planet has died. So our Earth has a sun. We call it a molten mass core, but it acts as a second sun. It's not as bright as the sun we have out here, but it's constant. And there is an inner Earth civilization called Agartha. And I talked about that in the Antarctica presentation that I just recently did. This also chronicled with Portal to Ascension, where I talked at length about the inner Earth. But the ancients, the Nibiruians, knew how to tap into the power of their own planet. And so they had built pyramids all over their own planet for energy, to harness the geomagnetic energy of their own planet. When they came here, after enough time passed, they began to do the same thing. They taught people how to do it. They themselves did it. Why? As an energy source. So there are all sorts of pyramids, as you can see, found all over the world. And most people think, South America, Central America, but in Europe as well. So we have Germany, that we found them, European ones, Bosnia, Russia, Turkey, the Canary Islands, Serbia, Slovenia, Macedonia, which is near Greece. Okay, and so you can just see that they're, some of them are covered up. They look like big old hills. Others are more open, and they've actually been excavated. Okay, this is China. China, of course, has been closed to the West for quite a long time, hundreds of years. But now things have become more open, and people have been over there and taken photographs. We've got satellite imaging as well. And again, these are all covered up by land. And in fact, it's the government actually supports people just going ahead and, planting trees or crops on top of them, because they really don't want these secrets revealed. And it's a sad thing, because what I think we would learn is why this worldwide culture existed, not just in Europe and in South and Central America, but throughout even North America. There were pyramid mounds everywhere that were built by the 8-foot, 10-foot, 12-foot tall demigods, basically, who had some of the knowledge passed down to them by their ancestors and sought to harness the energy of the earth. And when we look, for example, at Bosnia, the Bosnia pyramid is, I think, 700 and I think it's 40 feet tall. I mean, that's incredible, when the Great Pyramid of Giza is 450 feet. So the Bosnia pyramid is almost twice as tall as the Giza pyramid, which is extraordinary. And it's covered over, but you can see very clearly, you can see the lines and the indentions. And they've done now sonograms from the air, and this is what it looks like underneath. This is just incredible, isn't it? Incredible. So these pyramids were not built randomly. They were built on ley lines on the earth, creating a worldwide culture. And they were also connected with star alignments, in particular Orion, the Orion system, the Sirius system, the Pleiadian system, the Regulus system, and of course the Pleiades is in Taurus. So it created a worldwide web of energy where we were harnessing the electromagnetic energy of the earth and amplifying it. And this is a picture of that amplification process. Pyramids create naturally a torsion field. A torsion field is the spiral of creation, and everything is built on that template. The golden means spiral, or the Fibonacci spiral. This is the template that all organic life unfolds within. And so here is Carillion photography of pyramids in action, and how just simply by the shape itself, it generates this torsion field or spiral jetty, okay, that goes around and can be harnessed for power, for electricity, for travel, to power spaceships, to amplify existing ley lines and magnetic, invisible magnetic grids. And this is why pyramids, you know, were put up everywhere in the world, including in Alaska. And this is something that as the snow is melting and the ice is melting, we're just now discovering that there actually were pyramids not only in Alaska, but also in Antarctica. And in my presentation on Antarctica, which is archived with Portal to Ascension, I really go into this in great depth, and how that continent at the time of Atlantis was totally inhabitable. Atlantis was in the Atlantic, but there were cities and pyramids and advanced civilizations in Antarctica. And what happened was a meteor came through, hit the mid-Atlantic ridge. This is why we have a fractured mid-Atlantic ridge, took down Atlantis, but those tsunamis that resulted were so enormous that it caused the poles to shift. All the ice melted, the glacial age ended, and very suddenly the sea water rose about 300 or 400 feet in about a month, which is just unbelievable. And of course, most people perished, the ones that did not escape to safety. And there were said to have been 10 exoduses, definitely Egypt and Central America, South America, the Americans, the British Isles. These are some of the places where some of the survivors lived. But in Antarctica, we have now discovered a city buried under 3 miles of the ice. And this is a very advanced city. This is very hush-hush right now. I would not suggest that you go really looking for this information on the internet. In the process of putting together the slideshow, I went from having no viruses on my computer to 550 viruses, and I almost lost my entire operating system. So the powers that be, there's 7 or 8 countries down in Antarctica now. They're all in a race to try to find the technology and use it for themselves. America's one of those, probably leading the way. They have McMurdo Station, which has about 1,000 to 1,500 personnel there. But they found this city under about 3 miles of ice, and of course they're trying to go in and get access to it. They found 3 motherships, quite extraordinary. They've located at least 3 pyramids that are above the ice right now. You can sort of see very clearly this one and this one and this one and so forth. But believe me, there are more than that down there. I'm sure there are at least 7, if they're not more, because of information I know within the mystery schools. So we're at a place now where it is really, in my opinion, critical for us to not just buy this lobotomy that we have been sold, historical lobotomy 2,000 years ago or 1,800 years ago or 1,700, when the Catholic Church became the Roman Catholic Church. It was really the Roman Empire that decided that they were going to become the Roman Catholic Church. And of course there's a lot of wonderful things that were embodied, I think, in that initial impulse. Certainly they had these great spiritual mysteries. They believed that they were the next generation, or the receivers of this greater wisdom based on Christ's teachings. And if that had really, really been the case, we'd have a different world now, because Christ's teachings, he was the great aeon or avatar or messenger for our age. There's that one that's at the end of every age and the beginning of the next age. And his wisdom of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The kingdom of heaven is within. Love your neighbor as yourself. Forgiveness is the key. And the power of love are the things that can change our world into a better place. But unfortunately, that's not what happened, unless you have an organization run by spiritually enlightened people, you have people that become very interested in money and power and sustainability. And how do we motivate people to join our club? If they're not spiritually enlightened people, then, you know, we scare them to death. We threaten them and we get them to join us because the alternative is painful. Whether the alternative is going to hell, where you're saying if you don't join us, your soul will suffer for all eternity, or the alternative is going and stringing people up or burning them or imprisoning them, or calling people that have this deeper knowledge heretics, which is what the church did until the 1200s. And they killed millions of people. They burned libraries. This is why we called it the Dark Ages. It wasn't the Dark Ages for nothing. It was the Dark Ages because knowledge, science, growth, and art all went underground, particularly with the fall of the Neoplatonic movement, which happened around 400 A.D. So, you know, 312 A.D. You know, the Roman Catholic Church gets formed. We had some brief and shining moments in the 300s where there was Pope Julian who honored the Christian and the pagan religions, and then you had Theodosius get in there around, you know, 380s or 390s, and he set forth the Theodosian decrees that ordered the closing of all temples, or the conscription of all temples, because these temples, as William pointed out, were built over ley lines, and they held the power of consolidated energy and hundreds, if not thousands, of years of prayer and communities coming together. And so over the course of about 3 centuries, they took over 500 of these and built big cathedrals on them. And most of these were places that had been dedicated to some aspect of the goddess or the divine feminine. And of course, they just took them over. And the Theodosian decrees basically, you know, literally they inspired the destruction of the Platonic schools that had been going in Greece, that merged Christian belief and thought and wisdom and spirituality with science, with arts, with the humanities, and with the philosophers of ancient Greece and the wisdom of ancient Egypt. The Neoplatonic movement was really an important one. But with the murder of Hypatia, Hypatia was she was a female initiate and a teacher in Alexandria. Her father was Theon, who held the seat of mathematics at the University of Alexandria, which, by the way, had 13 lecture halls and could seat as many as 5,000 people. She was an astronomer. She was a humanitarian, but the Bishop of Alexandria was so threatened by her because she was consulted by the city fathers and so forth. He couldn't stand the fact she was a woman and she wasn't just a Christian, that he inspired these ignorant priests that couldn't even read to go and pull her off her chariot and to club her to death and to scrape the flesh from her bones with oyster shells and then set her on fire. And so with the death of Hypatia, it was the death keel really for those who sought wisdom and knowledge openly in universities and schools. And thus began really about 1600 years of horror. And, you know, the Inquisition only ended in Spain in the mid 1800s. That's like, you know, 140, 50 years ago. So about 50 million people were murdered in the name of the church. And this has nothing to do with Jesus. It has nothing to do with the beauty and the power of his wisdom and his teachings. You know, when they talk about the great horror that we'll have to pay the price, I think they're really talking about the horrors that have been done by the church in his name. And I was watching a show last night on the Vatican, and of course, you know, I have no doubt that there are many, many wonderful people who have done great things in the name of the churches, helped people, done more relief efforts, really come from that true Christ at heart. But unfortunately, the powers that be, they became very much involved in laundering money for Hitler. They became involved in pedophilia. Over 3,000 priests in our time, in current time, have been censored for pedophilia on young boys, 4-year-old boys and up. And so great things, great wrong has been done in the name of this. And unfortunately, I think the Vatican and the Opus Dei movement with, Cardinal Ratzinger, that became, Pope Benedict, and he's resigned now because he was so much involved in the slave trade with the children and pedophilia. And now we have a new one, Pope Francis, who seems to be a pretty good guy. But unfortunately, they have been involved, the Opus Dei movement, with the protection of the theology of ignorance. For world dominance for a long time, so they've become very much involved with the mafia and the shadow governments, and it's sad because really the church could be such a great force for good, and in some communities the church is a great force for good, and certainly the beauty that was laid into the great cathedrals of ancient Europe is awe-inspiring, and it was done by the Masons, it was done by the Templars, it was done by people that were trained within the great spiritual mysteries, who laid these secrets into art. And this is what William Henry was talking about earlier. Through the power of art, sacred art, you can see who was an initiate and who was not. You can awaken and activate through hermetics, which is the secret symbol language of the soul. You can activate these awarenesses within yourself. And the great spiritual teachers of the past, Thoth in particular, and his daughter Isis, and her husband Osiris, and their son Horus, the more enlightened group of Anunnaki gods, who really fostered wisdom and taught humanity as children to believe in the divinity that lies within us all, whether we live 80 years or 800,000 years. Those beings knew about these technologies for spiritual enlightenment. They understood about free energy, sustainable energy. They understood how to protect the earth, how to take care of the earth. And it's something that we seem to have forgotten in this crazy race for money, power, sex, and a misuse of energy. We seem to have forgotten the fact that we live on a paradise planet. And this is a critical thing that has got to change. And the only way I think it can change is for us to, and this is why I think the UFOs have arrived. They understand once we discovered atomic energy and nuclear energy, we now have the capacity to destroy ourselves. And if we're allowed to go out into space, we have the capacity to destroy others, to destroy other planets. And in the name of, world civilizing, we become the asshole conquerors, basically. And so this has to stop. It really does. And the more we can be aware of it, and I think we have great allies. I think it's really important for us to realize not only are there spiritual forces like angels and masters and avatars from the fifth dimension, but there are also higher consciousness extraterrestrial races from the third, the fourth, and the fifth dimension. We also have the whole group of beings that live in the inner earth who have been here. They are said to be the remnants of Atlantis and Lemuria long ago, that survived the flood, that were tuned in enough, that have created a completely peaceful civilization with 7 races living inside the inner earth. And this is, really important because they're citizens of this planet like we are. The cabals can say, well, those ETs are not citizens of this planet, but certainly the ones in the inner earth are. And once we started using atomic and nuclear weapons, we started really annoying the dickens out of these guys because this is their planet too. As they said, we allowed you to have your petty wars and we left you alone. But once you start threatening the health of the whole planet, this is not to be allowed. And this is one of the reasons that movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still came out, where that essential message of the ETs coming to visit to say, look, you know, we want you to thrive, but if you continue to threaten the planet, this will not be allowed. This is one of the reasons that message came forward. And it came out in the 50s, and it came at a time where many of you may or may not be aware, our government was approached by very beautiful human fair-haired beings from Venus. They have finer features than us. They tend to have blonde hair, blue, green, gray eyes, sometimes brown eyes, but they have a very advanced culture in Venus. And of course, that's not what we've been taught about Venus. We've been taught that there's 800 degrees Fahrenheit in Venus, and that the pressure is such that it would kill us. Well, if that's so, how did the Russians send a probe with a balloon that was able to land on the surface and give them readings? The pressure of 800 pounds per square inch would have crushed the probe and never even allowed the balloon to descend. So we have been misinformed, and because an advanced civilization lives on Venus, we're not even going over to Venus right now. The cabal's not interested. They're interested in going back to Mars, because that civilization basically was destroyed very slowly over time by the destruction of Tiamat. It took a very long time for the seas to dry up and the atmosphere to leak off, but there are people like my friend Laura Eisenhower who talk about the fact that there are already, at least 1,000 people or more living on Mars in underground bases. The whole idea that we're trying to terraform Mars instead of just taking the time to shift from coal and gas and oil and move to free energy and treat our own planet with respect is utterly ridiculous. I agree with William completely when he talks about if we only took the billions of dollars that we're spending on that and just use some of the free energy devices that have already been created since the time of Nikola Tesla, that have been primarily suppressed by the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and these cabal families that really got out of bounds, then we would have a different world. And of course it would decentralize some of their power, but now we know that something like 3% of the world holds something like 94% of the wealth in the world. That means 6% of the world how does that go? Anyway, the rest of us basically share 6% of the wealth, the other 97%. And it's an imbalanced equation. We all know you can't take it with you. It's what we do now that matters. And I think that we are in a time of vibrational movement where we must remember who we are as divine beings, which is why I wrote this next book that's coming out about the angelic origins of the soul and discovering what we're really doing here and where we've come from. And remembering what our true history has been, that we are star beings, that this planet was seeded by star beings, that we are the remnants. In fact, many times they think of us as the royalty, because we have so many different extraterrestrial races that have contributed to our evolution. It's not just the Anunnaki gods. It's also the Pleiadians and the Syrians and the Lyrans and the Arcturians and many different groups. So we must remember who we are as souls. We must take a look at our ancient past to figure out what is actually true and what we're being fed that is a lie, so that we can see through that, so that 3% that's trying to rule the world can't. And I think, as I said, that the tides of history are with us. There is a vibrational frequency shift coming to this planet that is cosmically sent from the galactic center out to our sun, and the sun is bathing all the planets in the solar system with that frequency. And that frequency is meant to vibrationally awaken us and upgrade us, and the old guard is fighting tooth and nail. So programs like this are fundamental for our awakening, that we spread the word and we have other people that can we can turn them on to. And this is why I write the books that I write and why I do the work that I do. And I think because of our time now, we're really, we started around 1-ish, something like that, 10 after 1. It's about 5 minutes of 4. And we're going to officially end this presentation. Although, like I said, I had a whole nother 75 slides I could end with. But I will just want to give you again my website. So that you guys have it for yourself and you can go to it. Let's just see. We're talking about the activation of the light body here at the very end of this presentation and the landscapes of heaven. But here you can sort of see my phone number if you want to contact me. I'm actually home most of September and October off the road. So I'm seeing clients and doing readings and healings. And then, you know, you're welcome to go to my website, triciamccannon.com or triciamccannonspeaks.com. And I've got all my books there. And I look forward to seeing you guys. I'm hoping to do a presentation, I think the first weekend, October 7th, with Neil. We've got some details to work out about that. But if you contact me at I'll give you my email too. It's Tricia McCannon, my name, speaks at yahoo.com, and you can just write and say, hey, please add me to your email list. I think my my newsletter thing is not working on my site right now. I've just kind of found that out, so I have to correct that this next month. But if you want to send me an email at triciamccannonspeaks at yahoo.com and say, please put me on your newsletter list, I'm happy to do that. And also if you're on Neil's, you'll find out about the October program. But I thank you guys so very much for joining us. I'm going to close this part down now and go over to the questions and answers to see if there's anyone in this last couple of minutes. We've got about 4 minutes to go to stay on time. But if anybody wants to type me any little questions or answers, I'm happy to respond to them. Neil, are you there, my friend?
Yeah, I am. Go ahead and click stop screen share so you can see the webinar platform.
Okay,
So
let's see. I
it should be top
this.
middle of your desktop. There you go.
Okay, so okay. So I'm doing okay now with
Yep.
okay, so here I am.
So
Yep.
that was great, Tricia. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's really true. You know, we're at such a critical time, and I think fear is not the answer. And it's very easy when you find out about some of this stuff to go, you know, egads, you know, and to kind of go into this fear space. But fear is not really going to solve the problem. You know,
Right.
spiritual consciousness development, communication, and creating a paradigm that's not, that's what the cabal wants. They want us to be in fear. They want us to be in reaction. And we can't create, the solution can't be created out of fear. It has to be created out of love and out of unity. Now, maybe these souls will never get it, or maybe they'll be taken off the planet. You know, that's a conversation. You remember we talked about the fact that I was going to do a couple of presentations in January and February about the prophecies with Nostradamus and the Indians and the Mayans and this whole shift of the ages. So we'll be doing that at the first of the year, but I'm hoping that we're still going to be doing one October the 7th.
Yeah, we already have that site up. It's been up for a couple of weeks. I put the link in the chat room. So if anybody wants to check out the upcoming event with Tricia called Blueprint of the Soul, the link is right there. So go ahead and take a look at it. And let me say that, like you said, don't fall into fear, right? But I feel something that can really give us validation to not fall into fear, even though we see a lot of chaos, is what you said last week at your webinar, the cycles of time. Part of the cycles of time is that, you know, we've been in the Kali Yuga, we've been in the Dark Ages, and if history can teach us anything, it's that we go through these cycles of consciousness, and that we've been at the bottom of the consciousness, so to speak, and we're definitely on our way back up. So all of these mechanisms that are following, all the corruption that is showing, all the darkness that we see, all the wars that we see, I feel is just the cabal and the darkness on its last rites, where they're just trying to fight to survive, but it's inevitable. History teaches us that now is the time for the ascension. So there is no fear. This is very important. The reason why we have the opportunity to speak about this information and get out to the masses is because, you know, the new age is here, you know, and it's time to shift our consciousness.
It's really, really true. I want to just I want to honor a few of these little questions and comments. Thank you guys so much for writing me, and I'm only kind of just now getting to see them. But if I can just take a couple of minutes, we've got Stacy from Kansas City. We've got Rizzo from Italy. We've got Nan Kayer from Orcas Island in Washington. Gina from Virginia. Gloria from Orlando, Florida. Valid from California, PQ from England. We've got Carrie from Chapel Hill, and Tim from Virginia, and Sarah from the south of France, Karen from Corona, California, Tax Critter, it looks like, from Austin, Texas. Gloriana from Orlando. Got Chapel Hill, here's England, Indiana. That's Nancy from Indiana. Demir from Sacramento. Goodness, we've got so many cool people here. I just love this. This is someone from Ireland. I think her name is, I might have to put on my glasses to see this. Oh my God. Her name is Jayton. What an unusual name. Bo, I think he's, where is he from? I can't even say. Aloha. He must be from Hawaii. David Vaughn from Columbia, South Carolina, and Justin from Pittsburgh. I mean, we've just got like the coolest people on this thing. Stancia, let's just see where she is. So she says, I've been waiting for this much truth to come out since I was born. Thank you. Me too. Ken, he says, I'm seeing hate as an epidemic. Ken, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I think, it's so frustrating being in America where Trump is the president. It's like a road show. And of course, he kind of epitomizes the narcissistic liar mentality. But I think what it is doing is it's bringing out how there's a lot of people that aren't aligned with prejudice or hate anymore, because he's such an exaggerated cartoon version of those things. And he stirs it up. I mean, personally, I think he's a reincarnation of Mussolini. I really do. And, he's definitely for the corporate fascist state. But I think what it's doing is, it's waking us up to the fact that this mentality, and whatever that base is, that 33% that no matter what he does, doesn't want to shift, is kind of helping us to identify people who are still trapped in prejudice and anger and hate, and they don't have a moral center, or their moral center is we're better and everybody else is worse. And so Ma says, we are the alchemist and we are the shift. I love that, Sweet Pea. That's just so great. Ken, I feel like we have to teach and not be present with the energy. Yeah, trying to stay above it is hard sometimes. This is why meditating is good. Nature is really good. Patricia says, when do we expect the earth changes due to approach our binary twin sun or Nibiru? I'll talk about that another time. It's a big conversation, but definitely in the first part of next year, I'll talk about what the prophecies are within the Hopi that have been fulfilled. We can look at the Christian prophecies, but it becomes a little dicey because there's been so much that's been twisted or distorted. You have to look at many different versions to sort of see if there's a place in the middle where they come together. Here's Robert. I'm Robert from the Netherlands. Hey, Robert. Yeah, so glad you could join us. I really honor all of you for taking the time in your busy Saturdays to do these workshops. I know how crazy life is on the little hamster wheel, but the more that we can spread this knowledge and look at the big picture and try to integrate, the physical facts, stay as grounded as possible so we're not, buying into something that's not true, with the spiritual piece. That combination is the left and the right brains. It is the sacred marriage, and it's the thing that really activates our own inner senses so that we can have our own direct experiences with the divine. And this is part of what I'll be talking about, and with this new book that's coming out, the October presentation, which I still have to put together for you guys, is the first time I'll really be presenting that material, some of the material that's in the book about the landscapes of heaven, the origins of the soul, the 9 orders of who we are, and how how we can really make that connection to break through these paradigms that we've inherited from these dysfunctional societies. So I hope to see you in October, and thank you so much for joining us now. Much love to all of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Tricia, for the amazing download as always. You're really appreciated and loved, so we appreciate everything you are. Thank you.
You too, Neil. Bye.
Talk later. Bye.